What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Tonight, we are going to be taking a look at a somewhat recent live stream call-in show that Cameron Bertuzzi over on Capturing Christianity did, where he had Jimmy Akin on to talk about aliens and demons, demonic aliens, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff in between that we are going to be covering tonight. And I've brought Aaron Adair with me. You can see Aaron. Hi, Aaron.
Yo, good to be back here with you guys.
Do you want to tell everybody kind of why, like, you're the perfect person to respond to this particular show that they did?
Yeah, so besides moonlighting as an analyzer of data professionally, PhD in physics, a lot of focus on astronomy, because the topic we're going to be talking is about aliens, demons, religion, with my co-author Jonathan M.S. Pierce, we wrote a book called Aliens and Religion, Where Two Worlds Collide, where we discuss all of the theological considerations if we ever did, truly discover and show there are intelligent life forms out there, and what sorts of problems would the different religious organizations have, whether it be Christian, Muslim, or even atheist. And of course, that book is wonderful and beautiful, and the only thing better than a copy of that book is 2 copies of that book.
Yeah, and I do have a link if you that I'll put in the description right now. After we get kind of started, I do have a link that you guys can get to Aaron and Jonathan's book here. It's a great book. I haven't actually finished reading it yet, but I mean, I know Aaron, and it's a great book. And for anybody wondering what I'm drinking tonight, this is Cosmic Little Thing IPA, and I guess the big boy can. Well, we thought it would be a pretty interesting thing to drink this while we talk about aliens and shit.
In that case, I thematically failed. My wife, I was making tea for us, and my wife said she wanted pumpkin spice tea, so that's what I'm going for right now, along with some water. So I'm going to be getting drunk on science instead.
Oh, nice. Well, I mean, luckily beer doesn't really get me drunk unless I drink it like really, really quick. But I will say that this is one of the reasons why I got it is it's 8% alcohol by volume. So it's one of the more alcoholic beers, I guess. Anyways, we're going to be getting into this tonight. Mostly it's going to be Aaron here explaining a whole bunch of science shit to us, and I really appreciate that, because like, while I can explain like engineering and software stuff, not saying that Aaron doesn't understand that too. I'm just saying that my specific area of expertise is extremely limited when compared to Aaron's expertise here. So, do you have anything that you want to say before we get started, or do you just want to jump into a clip?
So just to give a little bit of background here, so the whole point of this discussion is that more and more people are coming to accept that the science is consistent with, and maybe even indicating that because the universe is so gigantic and the materials that can make up the components of life, we should expect there to be other planets somewhere out in the galaxy or the rest of the observable universe with life on them and the potentiality of becoming intelligent, I should say. So we have the question as well, if there's intelligent life out there, could it come here? And because of like all the shenanigans that have been going on in Congress, hey, some people think they already have been here, and they've been messing with F-18 Super Hornets and other high-end fighters here in the U.S., for example. We probably won't be discussing those particular UFO events tonight, but nonetheless, there's all this thought, all this talk about there being aliens, and hey, religious people have also been saying we need to consider what this means. Some people are looking at these creatures as maybe the sorts of angels that are full of the Old and New Testament. Angels are just aliens, or conversely, angels they're not angels but they're demons. And so a lot of people even consider the whole alien abduction thing as a new form of demonic possession. The stream we're talking about here kind of delves into that a bit, but also just how plausible is it that we're visited by aliens, and what should Christians believe about these aliens, and also importantly, if say Mr. Spock lands in Rome, what will the Pope say to him? That's a question we might want to consider. What can the Pope say to Mr. Spock to say, hey, you need to convert to our religion? Is that logical?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people, if Spock actually landed on the planet, like they'd just be like, demon! And then they'd want to kill him. Like just immediately.
There's actually a Star Trek episode exactly making that point.
Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, Star Trek was pretty good. Is pretty good at like making reliable predictions about things. Like I'm thinking cell phones. I believe, like in the original Star Trek, just a little contraption you held in your hand, and you can speak across vast distances and everything. Like, I mean, it's not that hard when you're using science to make these kind of predictions, but
Yeah.
which I would think that Star Trek's more of a scientific sort of, I guess, sci-fi show, like as opposed to like the magic of Star Wars.
I try to be careful there just because if you ask, well, how does the transporter work? And they say it has a Heisenberg compensator, you realize, okay, this is a magic word.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they do have to throw in like magical ideas, I guess, on occasion to fully explain things. But like, I guess I wasn't meaning necessarily like the transporter type of technology, but
Yeah.
anyways, all right. So this first clip that we're going to get into, it's one of the longer clips that we got. Some of them are a little lengthy, but this one is concerning faster than light communication. And a caller has called into the Zoom that Cameron uses, and he's got this very specific question for Jimmy. If I can. Nope, hold on. There we go. All right. All right. Let me know if you can hear this, Aaron. You should be able to.
Right.
For you. Okay, my question, it could involve both aliens and demons, but given that we know that all creatures, including aliens, demons, human spirits, are bound by time, and the dimension of time in some way seems to be linked with dimensions of space, as indicated by Einstein's theory of relativity, could demons manipulate an alien civilization using demonic, faster-than-light communications, or would demons or the information that they carry still be bound relativistically since they are bound by time?
Before we get to Jimmy's response here, I do want to hear what you think about the question. Like, do you think that faster than light communication is possible? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is also going to touch onto some of the later clips as well when they actually talk about faster than light spaceships using certain solutions from general relativity. So I am going to probably be bursting bubbles in that I don't think these sorts of technologies are physically possible. And not only is it because we don't have the physics that even shows that it is allowable, but it produces all sorts of paradoxes. Basically, once you can have anything travel faster than the speed of light, you have developed a time machine, and then you get all of the paradoxes that come along with time travel. If you can send a signal faster than light to some point and have that signal also sent back faster than light, you can actually see this with space-time diagrams and see, hey, you can get the signal to go back to you before you sent the signal out. Paradox. You can start doing the whole kill your grandfather before he gives birth to your father sort of paradoxes. All the bad stuff that comes up in science fiction with time travel, the only way you can protect yourself from that is basically making that impossible. So in general, anything that is faster than light is going to create time paradoxes, and that should be already on its own reason to say this probably isn't going to work. Besides the fact that all the physics that attempts to get around that come across all sorts of other crazy things, but I'll get into the details about that when we later talk about the Alcubierre warp drive.
Okay. Yeah. I know that, and just, I guess, maybe trying to play devil's advocate a little bit here. I know that there was recently a study done, or experiment or something done, where they were able to detect like immediate like responses in on a quantum level, like between two, what is it? Maybe you can help me out here. I'm just working off of memory right now.
It sounds like you're describing the experiments with entanglement, which is a quantum phenomenon. It's been really well studied, and not even just recently. It was just recently that a Nobel Prize was given for this sort of work, and showing that basically entanglement can't be explained by any sort of physics that is completely local. It's basically a way of saying that spooky action at a distance that Einstein hated about quantum mechanics, it really seems to be embedded in the universe. So Einstein was wrong about trying to avoid that. This was ultimately trying to prove something known as Bell's inequalities, which is a way of trying to distinguishing between true quantum-y weirdness versus there's some sort of underlying hidden variables that are running things at a local level that we just haven't detected. Basically, is there actually something deterministic under the hood of quantum mechanics, or is it really that really weird probabilistic stuff that could happen even on things very far away? So when it comes to entanglement, it's basically that you have two particles whose states are linked in some particular way, no matter how far apart they are. They'll started right next to each other, but then if you take one particle to the Andromeda galaxy and keep one here, and then you measure the one, you automatically know something about the state of the other one, no matter how far away it is. You have that instant knowledge because of entanglement. And it's doesn't quite technically break causality, but it gets kind of like really subtle about what's going on there. And a lot of interesting physics had to be described about this, starting in like the late 60s, 70s, which actually is because of hippies. Funny enough, one of the books I have on my bookshelf back here is called How the Hippies Saved Physics. And basically a whole bunch of physicists who were, got their PhDs from major universities, and then the US government's like, we don't need all these physicists anymore, and like cut all the jobs. And so a whole bunch of them were still like interested in like the really weird quantum stuff, and the only people willing to fund them were like, rich tycoons that are also like say, hey, I want to check out all this psychic stuff and see what quantum mechanics has to do with it. And these physicists were doing actual legitimate physics, legitimate math, and because of people looking what they did, they developed things that are now becoming important in things like quantum computing. So in a very, very small ways, modern physics is weird. The hippies kept it weird, and more recent Nobel Prizes proven it's going to stay weird for a very long time.
Yeah. Okay. And how would you like if you were in a conversation and like let's say Jimmy brought up this particular experiment or study as evidence of instant communication or instant information that's available to you, how would you respond to that?
Oh, that was one of the things that like these hippie physicists were working on. But then one of the things that popped out from other physicists looking back at this, they developed something called the no clone theorem, and it's basically a way that you can't like any sort of way copy paste these sorts of quantum states for the purposes of like communicating that sort of information. And this is something that's not just suggested; it's something that's actually been formally proved. I think in the late 70s, and the no clone theorem not only makes it impossible to do faster like communication with entanglement, it's also something very important to quantum processing. So it's extremely foundational to our understanding of how quantum physics works.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So are you ready to hear Jimmy's answer?
Let's go.
All right.
Okay, so as we don't have a firm answer to this question because we haven't been able to do tests with angels or demons just being fallen angels, where we could actually test this empirically. However, in testing that's been done with human apparent, I want to stress that's apparent, but with apparent human psychic functioning, it doesn't appear to be light speed limited. And so you can theoretically remote view something that's farther away and get information about it than the speed of light would allow that information
to reach. All right, let's pause there, because while Jimmy is being cautious here about how much he accepts this, it's worth noting that Jimmy in general explores a whole lot of stuff that's usually called paranormal. Not just the stuff that is now, I guess, standard paranormal for Catholics, like demonic possession, but all the sorts of things that the psychics say and do. They claim that they can, read minds from a distance. In this case, you mentioned remote viewing, which is the ability to see things in a faraway place, even in like a completely closed off room, just by thinking really hard. And the thing is, this has actually been explored with U.S. government money. Starting in the 70s, that you had these groups starting at like the Stanford Research Institute, which actually wasn't at Stanford, but it had that adjacentness to it, and later actually funded by the CIA for the longest time, up until the 90s when they basically decided to pull the plug because they thought nothing useful was coming out of this. If you have heard or watched the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, that's based on a book by Ron Johnson, which was itself based on this sort of government research on remote viewing and psychic powers and all that, which had absurd things like psychically attacking goats. This is the level of unfortunately the quality of what he is citing here. So his evidence that his evidence that superluminal communication is possible is based on very fringe ideas that have not worked out very well when others have examined it. And in particular, like I said, the U.S. government was funding this like starting in the 80s in something called Project Stargate, or at least that's the name it took on later. It finally ended its funding in the 90s once they had a couple of psychologists looking at their work and basically said, hey, pretty much every positive result you have is probably explicable by either experimental error or information being fed illegitimately. Basically everything that even kind of sort of looks like a positive result has better explanations. And even so, the effects they're showing are just so tiny, it's almost certainly research error. Here's a problem in general with research on psychic powers or psi more generally. The idea that the researchers have is they are going to look for anything above and beyond no mental effect at all. So you run some sort of experiment, you do a statistical analysis and say, hey, we have statistical significance that our result is slightly above what you'd expect if there's no psychic phenomenon at all. So you might look at some sort of correlation value that goes between 0 and 1. They say, hey, we've proven with our stats data that it's 0.1. It's extremely weak correlation, but since what you'd expect is 0 and we can exclude 0, therefore psychic power exists. The reason that's not legitimate is that you're not comparing that to other hypotheses, such as you have a shitty experimental design and you're just picking up the tiniest little bit of bias in your results. And that is so much of what really seems to be happening. And this is a problem actually even in general with the sciences, whether it's medical, whether it's psychological, that there are going to be subtle, maybe not even well-known biases in the methods or in the population that you select from. And that's what your results are picking up. Not this other effect you're looking for, but just whatever little calibration issue exists fundamentally in the way that you are collecting or it exists in your data. And the psychic researchers just don't deal with that problem very well or at all. And that just fundamentally undermines everything. If you're trying to say, hey, we're going to prove the most amazing thing in the world, and we are not going to compare that to maybe we didn't record all the data correctly, or maybe somebody heard something down the hall and that's why they got this one answer right, or there's just some bias in the machine on their random number generator, any sort of thing that would be slightly more plausible than all of physics that we know is wrong.
Well, and I feel like I remember a study that was done. I can't name the study. Just sort of working off the top of my head here. I think I remember a study that was done that showed that remote viewing in the cases of like missing persons or anything like that actually hindered the investigations rather than helped. I'll see if I can find that study. But I remember reading a study about that where they're actually hurtful in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think there was some statement by the FBI back in the 90s that said that there's never been a case that was actually helped or led to any sort of criminal charges based on information from a psychic. And conversely, if the psychics don't know what they're doing and they're just throwing out random guesses, well, then following a random number generator to search for missing persons or dead bodies is almost certainly going to take you in the wrong direction rather than actual hard police work. So yeah, it almost certainly, unless psychic powers are real, it can only hurt.
And sorry, excuse me. I feel like the whole remote viewing, the psychic powers, I feel like this is trying, or at least in my interpretation, it's adding a layer of magic onto things. And I feel like that's never going to be compelling, like whatsoever.
It won't be compelling when there are other hypotheses that explain the same data, such as you took the data wrong, you fudged something, you forged something. And that's happened a lot in psychic research as well, where there's fakers. Uri Geller probably being a well-known example of someone who convinced researchers that he had psychic powers, but James Randi's like, everything he did, I can, do with the tricks I learned in, the standard magic trick book. So it's much more likely, at least, that he's doing trickery than he's getting his powers from another planet or something like that.
Right. Yeah. You ready to continue?
Let's carry on.
All right. Sorry, I'm not trying to like rush through it or anything, but we do have like a lot of content to
Oh,
cover,
yeah.
and I'm gonna try to cover as much as I can.
Yes.
And there have been parapsychological experiments done that way. Now, one of the things they did in the Middle Ages was they used humans they used angels, I should say, as kind of a model for understanding human consciousness. So you would have thinkers like St. Thomas Aquinas and John Duns Scotus, who would try to learn about human consciousness by thinking about alien consciousness and how angelic minds work. And so if that parallel holds, then if humans are able to do something that's not light speed limited, then presumably angels, including the bad ones, would also be able to do something that was light speed limited. And thus hypothetically, demons could have an effect on alien cultures, just like they had an effect on our culture, and they might be coordinating things without it being limited by the speed of light. So hypothetically, that's possible. As with anything involving either aliens or demons, though, I think we need evidence. And, we can think about and speculate about possibilities, but as long as we don't have actual evidence that something is happening, they remain just possibilities and not serious proposals. Does that help?
All right. So basically, a bunch of speculation based on how medieval thinkers did this, which, worth noting, is not how science is done these days. We don't have angels to examine, so people just sitting around thinking what angel minds must be like is what you would do if you have actually no data to work with. And most importantly, he seems to show just how weak the evidence that we have for all of this sort of stuff when he basically says we need evidence for it, and he confidently says we need evidence, which is a way of saying we don't actually have it.
Well, which I find rather interesting that he has this particular opinion about this, considering the lack of evidence, I guess, for like the resurrection or a lot of things in in Christianity in general. And
this will actually come up later, where a caller will be saying, or he'll be reading from another book, basically saying, "Hey, we think the evidence for UFOs is at least as good as it is for the resurrection. If you believe the resurrection, you should believe UFOs." And it's a reasonable a fortiori sort of argument, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But it is really seems to be the case that the epistemology that Jimmy has for accepting Christianity is what makes him at least willing to entertain a lot of these other things that are very fringe. And here I will also note, because I've watched some of other Jimmy's material on his YouTube channel and his parapsychology sort of shows, where he's actually also interviewed people from Project Stargate and things like that, the people who did all those psychical experiments. And Akin will basically say that actually the parapsychologists do even better experiments than actual regular psychologists, that they have even better methods than that. So kind of an interesting thing that he's kind of like, not really pushing things so much here, but elsewhere he'll basically say, oh yeah, the parapsychologists are doing the best science or the best methodological science. And yet here saying the evidence is not good enough to even say it's even evidence. That's
right.
It's a bit telling that he doesn't feel like here he can say that as confidently.
Yeah, which I guess he feels more comfortable on his own show saying a bunch of this stuff. But I mean, he was recently taken on to the board of Capturing Christianity, which, if you don't know, Capturing Christianity is like an organization that has like a board and everything like that. I'm not sure the organization, like the organizational chart or anything, but apparently Jimmy's been put on the board, and maybe he's just trying to, I guess, be maybe a bit more reserved here because of his position. But in any case, I think that, he is, it's just, I feel like it's sort of speaking out of both sides of his mouth. Like on the one hand, he's like, oh, well, if we don't have the evidence, then we can't say, that we know this. But on the other hand, like, we have really bad evidence, like, for a lot of the things in the New Testament or the Gospels. And he doesn't seem to apply like the same criteria for the evidence in both respects. And it's just interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Let's continue with I believe they're going to go back to the caller now for
yes,
something
that would help. I guess something that I could think of in terms of evidential information there, like from anything that we have in terms of accounts of alien interactions or demonic interactions. If there is some sort of possible faster than light communication via demons that would be possible, would some of those interactions then not be limited by technology of those alien civilizations, in terms of that there could be some sort of interaction with us faster than light that we could see in an alien encounter case.
I'm not entirely sure what you're asking. Are you asking, did demons give aliens faster than light technology so they could get here?
More in the sense that somebody could communicate with aliens faster than light via something like psychic functioning, or that demons could tell us something about or lie about something about aliens faster than light.
Well, okay, so if psychic functioning is real, and if it's not light speed limited, then presumably we could learn things about aliens faster than light, possibly by having telepathic contact with them. And in fact, there have been a wide variety of people who have claimed to have telepathic contact with aliens. In fact, in the 1950s, there were a whole group of people known as contactees, many of whom claimed to be in mental communication with various aliens. Unfortunately, almost all of the contactees look like frauds. So I don't think we have particularly good evidence there.
All right, pause. I missed this a bit before when he said almost all contactees were frauds. I'm curious what he thinks is true then about the residue of those who weren't frauds. It's worth noting that, like, yeah, back in the 50s, there was basically this spewing forth of UFO religions that basically popped up, including end-of-the-world cults and things like that. And one of the important books in psychology was written based on the explorations of one of these doomsday UFO cults, and led to the idea of cognitive dissonance. There was this group that basically thought that the world was going to end on some particular day, I think in 1953. I'm not 100% sure on the exact date. But basically the apocalypse came and went without, well, a giant boom. And this alien group, you would think that they would have disbanded. But lo and behold, the grad students who had actually infiltrated the group, who were members there, so that way they could see what all the other members were saying and doing, instead of the group just collapsing after the alleged apocalypse failed to materialize, they held onto their beliefs even more fervently, and they came up with all sorts of excuses of why it didn't happen. And this has become foundational for understanding apocalyptic groups in general, and this is where the idea of cognitive dissonance comes from. You have some sort of core belief, strong evidence of some sort, or at least some kind of evidence comes along, and you have a few options of what you could do, but one of the options very commonly is find some way to discount the evidence or accommodate in some way to that core belief rather than changing the core belief. In this case, the alien people said the end of the world is coming. The end of the world was spiritual, or because of our piousness, the aliens have given us a reprieve, or all sorts of other excuses, which might just sound familiar because it's the exact same things that Christians have been saying for about 2,000 years. So
yeah, I was
yeah.
I was going to say, it sounds a lot like what could have happened with Christianity, and what an alternative explanation to, what typically Christians put forth as far as the Christian origins. So
Yeah.
it definitely sounds very similar.
Oh yeah, though it is worth noting, cognitive dissonance is not something that just happens in fundamentalist groups. All humans are subject to it. All humans suffer from it. That includes me, but not right now because I'm right.
Yeah. And I'm interested to see where this conversation goes. We've only got about maybe 40 seconds left of this particular clip, but so far, like, I feel like Jimmy is trying to sound pretty reasonable, but at the same time he's sprinkling that little bit of magic like onto these explanations in order to answer the question.
With regard to the second question, could demons tell us about something about aliens? Well, they could, and it could be faster than light on the theories that we've been discussing. They could faster than light learn about some alien world and then tell us about that alien world. But the problem is you can't trust anything a demon says. They're working for the father of lies. And so if you know you're talking to a demon, you need to just set aside anything it tells you. And
my question is, how do you know you're talking to a demon?
It could just be an angel very good at lying. Or sorry, it could be a demon, but so good at lying you think it's an angel. To me, if I were a demon and I want to possess someone, I'm not going to have them wriggling across the floor, puking up, having their head going backwards, and all the things you see from The Exorcism. I'm going to hang out on this body and look holier than thou to everyone else and think, oh my goodness, this person has a guardian angel, and I get myself a nice corporal body to hang around with. Why go with the mess where I then have to deal with people telling me that the power of Christ compels me? So in terms of being deceptive, I would at least think the demons would be better liars. I should not be a better liar than these subjects who work for the Prince of Lies.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's quite curious because I can't remember like chapter and verse, book chapter verse in the Bible, but there is a situation where God actually orders his angel to basically lie to prophets that he has on earth, but only give one of the prophets the correct information. And all the other prophets are communicating lies that are directly from God. And so I wonder how he would answer that. Like the fact that God claims to have knowingly deceived, his chosen people in one respect or another. I mean, how can you then say that you can correctly discern between demons and angels
Yeah.
or God himself? Like
Yeah,
how do you discern between God and Satan if you're just going to be like, oh well, Satan's the father of lies?
Yeah, the example you're giving of God sending a lying spirit into the prophets, that's in, I think, Second Kings, and it's with King Ahab and his prophets basically lying to him and not letting them know that actually God has abandoned him, and shit's going to go real bad for Ahab very soon. But we don't even have to go to the angels. Just go to Genesis 2 and 3, and God lies to Adam about the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that if he eats from it that very day, he will die. And, well, according to the book, he lived for about another 900 years. That ain't the same day. And the efforts to try to get around that is try to get around the fact that God told a fib to basically say, don't you dare touch this thing, like, don't even get near it, and all that. Reality is they did die on the spot, and the only reason Adam actually did die is that he didn't have access to the tree of eternal life, because it even says in Genesis, if they eat of that tree, then they will be immortal just like us. They're already, wise like us. Now they could become immortal like us. That's why we got to kick them out of the garden and put a cherubim in front of the gate to make sure they don't get in and get that immortal fruit.
All right, there's about 20 seconds left, so let's see where he goes with this.
Do not believe it. I'm at some point in the future, I'm going to be doing an episode of Mysterious World about this, because I see a lot of people today, including exorcists who ought to know better, reporting things that demons have told them in exorcisms as if they're the truth. And I'm sorry, but you just cannot trust anything a demon says. So so they could hypothetically tell us about something about aliens, but you couldn't trust them if they did.
I mean, again, I'll just reiterate, how do you know that it's a demon? And also, the only reports that we have as far as like demons in Christianity go, I mean, is from one side. How do we know that they actually do lie to anybody? It seems to me, like from reading Genesis, that it's not Satan that's the snake, but the serpent, right? That evil force in the garden doesn't seem to lie to Adam or Eve. He's
actually the only one in the story who tells the truth, actually.
Right. So it's like, who's the father? Like, obviously in the Bible it says that Satan is the father of lies, but that's just them saying that Satan's the father of lies. What if he's not? It seems to me like Satan, as far as Christianity is concerned, is like the father of knowledge, like giving you true knowledge, because that seems to be what it is. I'm not a Satanist or anything. I'm just saying, from the perspective of just reading the Bible and trying to consider what Jimmy is saying here, it just doesn't make sense. That's all.
Yeah. It is worth noting, just assume you had never been told the history of the Bible and it just showed up in front of you. And if you read it, how would you know it's from God versus from Satan? Because remember, it's going to have, probably mix truth and lies to make it even more convincing to you. But it's still from the Prince of Lies, potentially. How are you going to know that? And honestly, you should at least think it's a biased source. Just to even show like how mixed up we can have. We can take something that was actually a protector being and then turn it into a demon. I mentioned The Exorcist before. If you've ever seen The Exorcist 2, the demon from the first movie gets its name, Pazuzu. And that was actually the name of a Mesopotamian creature, but who's actually a protective agent, especially like protecting children. Doesn't sound like the sort of person who would come around and mess with a 16-year-old child Reagan. It's like, no, this is quite the opposite of their normal role. It's just someone found that name and thought, I guess it sounded cool as a demon name. And that's how we got that.
It's interesting. I didn't know that about the Exorcist demon. That's interesting. All right. So we got another clip here, and this is, I've titled it "The Implications of Aliens," I guess, as far as like what does it imply for Christianity, what does it imply in general, and so we'll just play it.
Right.
Yeah, so I think it'd be helpful if I've studied ufology a lot, and I've studied the science of the possibilities of life on other planets, and I thought it'd be helpful to just give people a sense of where I am on this after all the study I've done, because a lot of people are UFO dismissive. They don't believe aliens are possible. Or they don't believe they could get here. Or other people go to the other extreme and they think, oh yeah, they're definitely here, and they're coming in my bedroom at night, taking me off and abducting me. And so I think that
it's worth pausing right here for a moment.
We need to be careful and discerning in.
When he say that people are being too dismissive in talking about aliens getting here, it's not a matter of being dismissive. It's a matter of noticing the universe is really freaking big, and it is so hard to get from one star system to another with rocket technology. So, for example, if we took the fastest thing we've ever launched into space, and we fired it in the direction of the nearest star, Proxima Centauri, approximately 4 light years away, it would take on the order of 70,000 years to get there. That's to the nearest star with the fastest thing we've ever launched into space. And that's without the thing ever like trying to slow down and actually stay around there. It's just going to zip past. And this is not a life ship or anything else. It's just a tiny little probe. It's not going to carry biological beings along to like colonize things. And that's just, again, the nearest star. And that is, of course, kind of a crazy long amount of time if you expect aliens to hop around gallivanting around the galaxy. It's basically staying in some metal tube for longer than the entirety of human civilization times 10 just to zip by some other place and see if it's even worth staying around. And of course, that's the nearest star. Now, like I say, the nearest star is approximately 4 light years away. If I wanted to go from one side of the galaxy to the other, that's on the order of 100,000 light years. So those crazy big numbers I gave you, multiply it by 10 to the 5th power. And that's just for this galaxy. If there are no other aliens around here and they have to come from another galaxy, well, our nearest major galaxy, Andromeda, is about 2.5 million light years away. And that's the nearest major galaxy. So when we say we're being dismissive, it's like, no, we're looking at the map. And we see that this is not a plausible thing that somebody just, hops in a Volkswagen and thinks it's going to just be a weekend trip. No, this would be a monumental effort just to cross the smallest distances between the stars, let alone hopping across entire galaxies. So I'm not dismissive. I just know enough to say this has problems that you can't just sweep under the rug.
Right. And I know that Cameron has a proclivity to have people on his channel that refute or not refute, but they disagree with like evolution and the general well accepted idea of how old the earth is. Don't you think that this particular problem right here, like just how fast light travels and the fact that we can see stars in the sky, don't you think that is pretty good evidence against like creationism?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's without turning God into an active deceiver, the fact that you can see things further away than 6,000 light years is just precluded by pretty much the entirety of astronomy, all of stellar and galactic astronomy, because, yeah, the fact that you can see things millions or billions of light years away, which tells you how long light takes to get here, that should be telling you pretty well. So the idea that they put light in transit already is basically forcing God to be deceptive. And the fact he also have to give all these things apparent age, because not only is it that you're looking at like a galaxy a billion light years away, but you're also looking at the galaxy as it was a billion years ago. And so you go further back in time by looking further back into space, and you see, hey, things look less like it is in modern times. You can see like galactic evolution in that sort of way. And you go back far enough, you don't even see galaxies at all. So it's like, hey, we almost see like evolution through time by looking at things further and further away. So God is not only putting light in transit, but also basically manufacturing entire photo albums of the universe so the universe has baby pictures. That is active deception by the Almighty. And if that's what young Earth creationism needs, then that just shows that their God is the real liar. And this goes back to what we said about demons before. I think God is the baddie in this case.
I agree. And I don't know what Jimmy Akin's take is on creationism. Like, I don't know if he's a creationist. I know that there are some Catholics that are creationists out there, but for the most part, most Catholics are fine with evolution and like deep time and all that kind of stuff. So
the previous Pope said that evolution is more than a hypothesis. I think the current Pope hasn't said anything disparaging, and he also has a science background. So at least for the upper echelons, ancient Earth, evolution, that's okay. I think the bigger bugaboo right now, even in the higher echelons, is things like neuroscience and psychology, suggesting that basically the mind is the brain and we're just meat stuff and there's no soul. That is more intolerable to modern Catholicism, in my understanding.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem. Let's see where Jimmy goes with this, though.
In this area, I tend to divide the question into 3 sub-questions. The first question is, does life of any form exist elsewhere in the cosmos? And there are people who hold different opinions about this. I've seen some, like the Christian astronomer Hugh Ross, argue that the existence of life is so unlikely on naturalistic grounds that it shouldn't exist anywhere else in the universe, any kind of life at all. But the problem is that it exists here. So even if life is so statistically impossible, that it needs an intelligent designer to put it someplace, well, God did that and he put it here. And if he put it here, he could put it elsewhere too. So arguments from statistical unlikelihood on naturalistic grounds don't work when you've got an intelligent designer who is in control of the cosmos. So if God put life here, he could put it elsewhere. And so I think we need to.
Well, I want to interject right here just because I'm not that great at statistics. Like, I had it. I've got a math minor, but that's just not how statistics works. Like, either coming from Hugh Ross or from Jimmy here. Like, Jimmy's partially right. The only thing that I really disagree with Jimmy on here is his adding of God into it. Because, like, if you're going to add God into this equation, statistics just doesn't even fucking matter. Like, why are you even mentioning statistics? Like, there's just no reason to consider like the naturalistic explanation concerning statistics when you're entering like this magical wizard, cosmic wizard that could just do anything anytime that he wants to. So it's like statistics doesn't mean a thing in this particular respect. But the Hugh Ross thing saying that it's statistically impossible, which I haven't looked up what Hugh Ross says exactly, but if he does say that it's statistically impossible, what he's saying is, to rephrase it in a more mathematical sense, is that there's a 0% likelihood that life would have started elsewhere in the universe, given how unlikely it is that life would start in the first place, I guess. But anybody that knows anything about predicting like stuff like this in general knows that you should not pick 0, like, at all. And so unless the chance is 0, meaning that it's like just completely illogical or it violates some known axiom of reality, like violating laws of logic and or anything like that, like unless it's that, then you can't say that it's 0%. And therefore, given the amount of planets that exist out there, and then the radically smaller amount of planets that could support life, the likelihood of life being on another planet is like pretty good. Like, it's going to happen. If it happened here once, it's going to happen again, statistically speaking. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
So I haven't read what Hugh Ross says specifically to this, but I would assume that he's not saying the probability is 0, but that is just so close to 0 that even with trillions of planets, that's still not enough opportunities for life to emerge. So if the probability of life emerging is, say, 1 in a quadrillion, and there's a trillion planets, then that would still suggest it would be unlikely for life to emerge, even given a trillion opportunities, if it takes, on average, 1 quadrillion attempts to get it to work. It basically be just like with the lottery. If you go to the lottery and you're the only person who ever goes to the lottery, your chances of getting the winning ticket is pretty darn small. But the reason people ultimately do win the lottery is that so many people go and buy tickets that it becomes plausible. So if the number of people getting lottery tickets is too small, or somebody really cranks up the numbers on the lottery machine and the chances are 1 in a trillion, then sure, it becomes unlikely that anyone ever is going to win. I think that is what Ross's argument would be, but it's worth noting this is in tension with a different argument, because it sounds like what Ross is trying to say here is life is so improbable, the conditions needed for it are so special that it requires basically God to come in and make life even possible. Mm-hmm. That is running contrary to the fine-tuning argument, where the universe has the constant of nature perfectly fine-tuned so life is even possible. If we're saying the universe is fine-tuned for life, but it can't produce life without God coming in, then it's not fine-tuned for life. God still has to do this. So honestly, Hugh Ross's argument there, and I think elsewhere he's promoted fine-tuning because he'll grab any sort of argument he can for theism. These two arguments are very much in conflict. You can't say the universe is designed for life and the universe is really crappy at ever producing life.
No, yeah, I didn't think of the implications of that, how contradictory it is. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. You ready to continue?
Let's carry.
To be open to the possibility of life in some form, even if it's not intelligent life, even if it's just bacteria elsewhere. I think we have to be open to that. And my guess is that probably exists. And I have two reasons for that. One reason is the cosmos is so huge that it just seems a little implausible to me that God would create this enormous cosmos and have only mankind be in it. If he made all these extra planets, I mean, there are just trillions of extra planets in the cosmos, and the thought that he didn't put life on any of them, I find implausible. The second reason I find it,
I can't stand it with the cowboy hats. Like, I get it. Jimmy Akin's a cowboy apologist, apparently. Like, he wears the 10-gallon hat wherever he goes. But Cameron also wearing one, it kills me every time. I just can't stand it. Like, I don't know. Anyways, what do you think about what Jimmy's saying here?
So it is an interesting thing because it's kind of a paraphrase in some ways of a line that comes from some of the works of Carl Sagan. If the universe is, this big grand place and they're the only ones in it, it's kind of a waste of space. Now, that sort of phraseology, makes it sound like there's supposed to be purpose and then it's not living up to its purpose. And Sagan was not a believer, but it's mostly rhetorical what Sagan was trying to do with that, especially when he puts it in a novel like Contact. The thing is, though, with Jimmy's position that God has made this huge universe, and so it would make little sense to keep it completely empty, I then have to wonder, it now becomes kind of an engineering question. If it is appropriate for the universe to not be empty, what is the correct amount of life that is the most compatible with theism? Should it be that every single rock in the cosmos is just covered in life? And just God is just so loving of life that he makes it abundant everywhere possible? Or is it that life should be absurdly rare, that we're the only ones in the entire universe? Or is it just that every other galaxy gets an intelligent civilization? What is the correct amount of life on theism, and especially on Christian theism? And I don't think Jimmy or anyone can answer that because it's honestly quite ad hoc. Hugh Ross says, hey, we are the only ones in the entire universe. And Jimmy's saying, no, that's too empty. It's this is a completely subjective sort of thing with no actual evidence, even biblical or religious evidence, really, to go by. And it's just one of the things that religion, or I should say specifically theism, is a really bad hypothesis because it has no predictive power. You say the universe is built for life. Well, most of the universe is not even capable of life. Most of the space of the universe is deadly radiation-filled vacuum. Most of the mass of the universe is in the form of black holes and fusion bombs that we call stars. These are not places that things can live, and that's the vast majority of the matter that we actually can see. Then we also have dark matter, which is matter that doesn't even interact with light and is not capable of life. So the fact that almost all the universe can't even have life operating on it or living in it in those spaces, it just lives on the outer crust of occasional worlds. How is that what you would expect on a universe created for life? To say that is the expected level is, I think, special pleading.
Yeah, and I was gonna mention this. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but in the spirit of like contradictory explanations for like their God, I kind of feel like if God can only create life where life is possible, doesn't that limit his power? Like I feel like if God was all powerful, then there would be no there would be no situation where life isn't possible, especially if he fine-tuned our universe for life.
Yeah.
Because I mean, when you think about a fine-tuned universe for life, you don't think a vastly empty universe, or whatever, and then a tiny little speck of life right here in this one little part of the universe.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there seems to be a lot of contradictory ideas that are going on here.
Oh, yeah. And in fact, it's one of the things I've even mentioned before, and I'm not the person who came up with this, not by a long shot. But the weird thing that the fine-tuning argument, the constants of nature are fine-tuned for life to exist, it's actually, when you back up and you realize, hey, just as you said, can't God make a universe of any form and life can exist in it? Why does the universe have to be fine-tuned for it? God can just supernaturally have us exist in any possible sort of universe. So fine-tuning where life exists in it is actually what you expect on naturalism, not theism, actually. So strangely enough, fine-tuning is actually more expected on naturalism than on theism. So
Right.
if your mind isn't blown by that one of the arguments for God should actually be an argument against God, then we need to have a stream just about that, because it's such a mind-blowing thought.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think it extends obviously far past like the conversation that we're having now, because I feel like the moral argument actually is better evidence for just I guess a more naturalistic view of morality versus the magical, I guess, religious kind of view for it. Because I feel like those that make the moral argument for their God put their God up on this pedestal, and they claim that, oh, well, anything that is good, God says is good, or God mandates or whatever, like he's in control of that. But he obviously makes some pretty abhorrent statements and commands in the Bible. So it's obviously not that God. And so like, I feel like the moral argument's an actual argument against God. And, rephrase it a little bit, I guess.
At the very least, when people like Bill Craig say that we have these moral intuitions that make us realize that there has to be some sort of moral grounding, and then we read this book that just completely slaps at our moral intuitions, and Craig still carries on and says the genocides of the Canaanites and things like that. No, those babies had it coming, and they're actually it's a good thing those babies were slaughtered. It's like, okay, you can't say we're going to use our intuition to ground, or say that morality has a grounding, but then that same intuition, we're going to throw it out because our grounding says it needs to grind down babies. We got to stop. We got to stop and say, all right, we need a different attack here. We need a different approach.
Yeah, I think I did a review of one of his speeches that he gave like 10 years ago. Speaking of William Lane Craig, where he said, he literally said that it's better to kill a pagan child than to allow them to live as a pagan. Like that's some, I mean, I'm paraphrasing obviously because he said it in a different way, but I mean, that's the exact thing that he said.
Yeah,
the spirit,
and he's actually been consistent
spirit
on that. He had a more recent conversation with Alex O'Connor, and basically saying the exact same things, that the babies that were killed in those genocides, well, they instantly go to heaven, so actually it was a blessing for them. The only people who really suffered at all were the Israelites who had to do the slaughtering in the first place and have to suffer PTSD for being literal baby killers.
I feel like if you're in the position where you're like, actually, the real trauma was done to the people killing the other people, I feel like you've got a warped sense of what fucking trauma is.
My hand got really swollen from all the stabbing I did to my girlfriend. She really should be compensating me for this. Like, yeah, that's the sort of logic that should stop.
I'm the victim here. I'm the victim. All right, let's see what I think Cameron's about to chime in with something here.
Do you mind if I pause right there and ask you a little bit more? Yeah. Would you? Does that apply only if theism is true? So, like, if God exists, your reasoning is kind of like, if God exists and created the universe and created us, then it would seem like it seems implausible that He would only create life in one spot. But then the question would be like, suppose that atheism were true, there was no God, and we were just here by chance. Would you think that would be as likely? Would there still be other?
Yeah, I think that the argument then would have to shift to statistical grounds of how likely is life to arise without an intelligent designer. And many scientists think that it can arise without an intelligent designer. And so that would be a different
Many scientists out there, they say that life can't arise. They just can't. Many scientists, many good, smart scientists that we pay from the Liberty Chapel Center.
Yeah. At the very least, it seems that Jimmy is okay with the idea that, yes, the improbability argument, even on atheism, doesn't preclude life, which really means that the whole thing about the universe being fine-tuned for life, or like the conditions in the universe are such that it's improbable. He basically throws that out. So ultimately, you can say from Jimmy, he cannot use arguments about the hospitality of this universe for life as an argument for God, because he's even saying even atheists can say there's going to be life out there because of the statistical grounding. So
right,
yeah, let's throw that argument out.
argument for it existing elsewhere, given the size of the universe. So my specific argument that I proposed is based on theism, but that's a theistic argument that's granting the premise that it's so unlikely on naturalistic grounds that you wouldn't expect it anywhere else in the cosmos. However, I can also challenge that premise and say God may have set up the universe in such a way, again, reverting to a theistic position, where he doesn't need to intervene in every case in a miraculous way to get life going. He may have set up the universe so that it forms, based on the principles he built into the universe in various locations. And then
it's almost like God isn't fucking needed, Jimmy.
Like I do like I do
Go ahead.
like how he is, very willing and being reasonable and like trying to grant these other thought experiments and allowing for different premises to still get to the same conclusion. I think that is quite admirable. But it is, of course, interesting that he will jump from the argument from life is too improbable, God is needed. There's plenty of opportunities, but that's because God set up the conditions to make it possible. It's one of those, again, it's the conflict between the two different kinds of fine-tuning arguments out there. And really it shows ultimately, how does theism prove that God is real? Heads I win, tails you lose. No matter what the actual setup is, God is the right answer. It really has that structure.
Yeah, it does. I really can't get over the fact that he's like describing a situation where God is virtually undetectable, not indetectable, undetectable. And yet he's saying, oh, but God is required to set it up this way so that he's undetectable. Like it baffles me that anybody would be convinced like by this particular line of thought. But I do want to echo what you're saying here, in that I'm glad that he's allowing these other thought experiments and everything like that. It just seems like he's definitely got a bias like in one particular direction.
If that's the case, if the laws of the universe are set up in such a way as to produce life under certain circumstances, then you may or may not believe in God. So that's kind of an exploration of my first argument that would not necessarily presuppose theism. Okay. My second argument is, I think we got pretty good evidence there's life on Mars. I did a two-parter of Mysterious World about this. And in the 1970s, when the Viking probes arrived at Mars and they ran the tests for life, the tests turned out positive results. They said there's life here, at least a bacterial life in the soil. And NASA then changed the success criteria after the experiment had been run, which is bad science. You don't change your criteria after
All right, let's
you
pause
run the
there.
experiment in order to.
Let it go for a few more seconds. He's going to say one other thing. I want to make sure this is all on tape first.
Okay. I feel like this is bullshit, but yeah, I'll let it play.
Get the result you want. And so we already had that as positive indication of life back in the 1970s, and there has been considerable more data come in. In fact,
all right. So there's a few things that he says here. The thing that I found particularly strange, though, was when he said that they changed the criteria to get the results they wanted. Who at NASA wants to say, I am so happy there is no life on Mars. I want to make sure that we change the experiments to say, no, there is no life on Mars. My goodness, the whole reason these experiments went out is because scientists had been hoping and dreaming and imagining life on that world for so long and wanting to find that life and send these missions there to finally provide the evidence for it. They were, if anything, biased towards finding life on Mars. Actually, it was quite the body blow to many scientists when like the first probes were flying by Mars and taking pictures of it, and it looked like this dry, burned out, desolate desert world with the most tenuous of atmospheres and things like that. In particular, in the original Cosmos series by Sagan, he talks about, like, when he was growing up reading the stories of John Carpenter of Mars, and that was filling his imagination. And so, people of his generation are wanting to, explore Mars and find, canals there and space princesses and things like that. That's what they were kind of hoping for. And the fact that, hey, we can't even show there's bacteria here is the exact opposite of what so many scientists then and now want to show. So that part is a bit striking and very strange from my experience talking with everyone else who's ever explored Mars. Now, what he is saying here about the Viking probe. So a bit of background. There were two landers, Viking 1 and Viking 2, that actually had landers that went to the surface of Mars, and they had basically these laboratories on them. They would scoop up Martian soil, and they could dump them into these vessels that came along with it and do chemistry experiments. Now, in these experiments, they aren't like pulling out a microscope and looking for bacteria and looking for like anything crawling around or anything like that. What they basically did is like, there were several different ones, but one of them was they basically took a nutrient bath, dumped it on the soil, let it sit there for a while, and then see basically, do you get the signs of respiration? Do you basically see what looks like something eating the stuff and then belching out CO2 just like we do? That sort of thing is what they were looking for. And those experiments seem to suggest, hey, there are signs of respiration. And then from that respiration, inferring life. Now, why is it, though, that people say the Viking experiments failed to show that there was life? Because that was not the only experiments there. Other experiments were trying to look at what is in the soil. And this big red flag for those earlier respiration results popped up when they looked and said, hey, this soil has virtually no organic material in it. If there's no organic material, how can there be respiration from organic beings? That is wild and makes it much harder to understand and explain. So while those results looked positive for respiration, it wasn't consistent with the fact that there was nothing in the soil that could plausibly be biological, because there was nothing organic in that soil. You would have to then posit, well, there is something in the soil that gives off respiration like life, but doesn't have organic material in it, yet respirates just like organic material when you give it organic nutrients, but it's actually of inorganic stuff. That is like a bunch of like house of cards sort of stuff to try to make things consistent there. We've also discovered other things that make it really hard. In more recent studies, I've seen that, hey, the soil on Mars has perchlorates in it, which is basically toxic to biological creatures. And also there's just this other background issue with the idea that there's actually bacteria living and breathing on the soil of Mars right now, at least at the surface level. The Martian atmosphere is extremely low pressure, so low that you can't even have liquid water on the surface. If you were in a Martian habitat and you walked out with a bucket of water, it would start instantly boiling and freezing at the same time. Liquid water cannot be sustained there. It's kind of like if you've seen dry ice. It instantly goes from solid to gas. Water would do the same thing, or does the same thing on the surface of Mars. And if you can't have liquid water, wow, how can you possibly then have life as we know it? That, and also because the atmosphere is super thin and it's mostly carbon dioxide. So how would you have normal respiration that needs oxygen if there's virtually no oxygen in the air? There's lots of background things that make you say, okay, we may not know what is happening with these respiration experiments, but the other evidence is inconsistent with biology as we know it. There is still one or two scientists from the original Viking studies that has been continuing the work in trying to make things consistent along the way. I have not explored that person's arguments, but he's very much in the minority, and most other scientists would say, at least on the surface of Mars, it appears to be dead. Conversely, could there be something under the surface that's living? I think that's still at least a possibility, but we don't have direct evidence for that, and definitely not something proved back in the 70s.
Right. So basically what I'm hearing, as far as your explanation of it goes, is that they didn't change the criteria for determining if life was there. They just took a very wholehearted look at all of the evidence that was gathered and made a conclusion using all of the evidence instead of just one particular experiment.
Yeah, you could think of it almost like a crime scene. Hey, all this evidence points to the suspect. but you can't ignore the fact you have him on videotape in another state at the time the crime was committed. You might say, hey, this evidence is consistent with that, but you also have this other inconsistent evidence, and you can't just ignore that and say, well, you're changing the criteria. It's like, no, you have to incorporate this additional evidence that confounds your original idea, and you have to go back to the drawing board to understand what's happening.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go as far as to say that Jimmy Akin's lying here, and I don't think anybody else should make that conclusion considering what we've heard. But I do feel like that maybe he just misunderstands like those experiments or what the actual conclusion was concerning what he's talking about. I feel like that's the charitable interpretation of it, is that he just simply doesn't understand.
Yeah, I think it's also, there's a bit of cherry picking of the evidence and the experts to get to this conclusion. And this will become even more so as we go further into this clip and the other evidence for life on Mars right now.
Would you consider like the nature of cherry picking in general to be a bit of a dishonest act?
It's a bit difficult because a lot of it I can also see as kind of a self-deception rather than actively trying to deceive people and hide things from them. It's basically, what do people do when they want to prove something? They go on Google and they take the very first search result that matches what they're expecting and don't dig any further than that, or then find any excuses for why the other ones don't actually prove what needs to be there. It may not be intellectually defensible, but it's not the same thing as lying. I want to have a higher standard for what lying is.
No, I completely agree with you on that. So great. I'm thinking about how people could, portray things like in the comments or after this. And I just wanted to be very explicit about, certain responses. So let's see where Jimmy goes with this.
The guy who was behind the 1970 experiment, kept a track of all the new data coming in supporting the existence of life on Mars. And I linked to that in my episode on life on Mars. Just to give a couple of brief notes about what some of that evidence consists of. There are seasonal methane cycles on Mars where it appears that methane is being released into the Martian atmosphere in conjunction with the seasons. And that's something that happens with life here on Earth. Also, there are objects on Mars that can be seen from orbit that look like some kind of plant life. They look kind of like trees. There also are objects on Mars that some of our probes down on the surface have seen, which look like mushrooms growing overnight. And so I think that there is significant evidence for life on Mars. That doesn't mean it evolved on Mars, or doesn't mean it started on Mars. It may have started on Earth and gotten blown to Mars by meteorites, or so it may have originated here on Earth, but it looks like there is some kind of life on Mars, and that would also tend to support the proposition that there's life elsewhere in the universe. So if I had to guess, and it's a guess, but if I had to guess, I think life is likely of some kind is likely to be elsewhere in the universe. What about intelligent life?
All right. So, mushrooms on Mars. Now, this proves, first off, that Jimmy is a fun guy. All right. Pun out of the way. What is he even talking about here? Pictures of mushrooms on Mars. I had to look this up because I was like, where the halibut is this coming from? And apparently this came from a no impact journal, predatory journal out of China, where a delusional person basically looks at pictures and says, this looks like that, therefore it is. And really, other scientists have looked at these same images that he says look like mushrooms, look like little modules that are mushrooms. These are almost certainly rock formations. I think diadrites, I think is what it was that I was looking things up. And it's like, yeah, the plausibility that we've actually found mushrooms popping up out of the ground. And by the way, you know what mushrooms normally eat? Organic material. And as I mentioned, what's on the surface of Mars? No organic material, and the soil is actually hazardous to organic material. This is just, on its face, an absurd claim. Yeah. What everyone else is basically saying, you basically found this in the crappiest journal possible, and by a person who is just constantly claiming that they see things almost at the level of people said they've seen Bigfoot on Mars. There's actually people legitimately said they've seen pictures of Bigfoot in images from the Curiosity rover and things like that. And it's just straight up pareidolia at best. Yeah, so please. And he says he's getting this all from the one expert, and I think this was the expert from the Viking thing. I only noticed that now. So this really now makes me take the credibility down of this one scientist, because if he's going to mushrooms on Mars papers for proof of life on Mars, I really think that I can't trust this person's judgment on what is good evidence for life on Mars. And especially if he's the only one, and this is what he goes to, I'm going to say, yep, I'm backing up. I'm going with the consensus. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I feel like we all know that it's really the transformers that exist on Mars. Like, I mean, we've got footage. So, I mean, I'm talking about, I think that there was like a teaser or something like that of one of the Transformers movies where it was like one of the Mars rovers or something like that that got destroyed, but got destroyed because a transformer smashed it. And so I don't know, this is a bad joke, but I feel like this is on the level of the conspiracy theorists that like point out like the face that is on Mars or whatnot. That's the pareidolia thing. And then you've also got the crazies out there that like hyper fixate on these pareidolia type of images that the rovers and whatnot have sent back, and like they seem to recognize these shapes, but it's not really like that way. Also, it's a little curious how Jimmy is like saying all this stuff, but yet earlier he was talking about how important it is to have good evidence for things. He seemed, again, speaking out of both sides of his mouth. It's like fucking Trump.
I wouldn't even say so much speaking both sides of his mouth, but this must tell you what is the standard of evidence that Jimmy uses to get to his positions. And if this is the same standard he uses to get to Christianity, then it really tells you something about the epistemic state of religious theism, or theism generally, I should say.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I'm quite open to the proposition that intelligent life is very rare, because in the 4 billion years that we've had life here on Earth, we've only had intelligent life for a tiny fraction of that time. And so I could imagine many worlds where intelligent life doesn't exist and needs a particular set of very rare circumstances to arise. So I could imagine it's rare, but but the universe is so big with just trillions and trillions of planets. If I had to guess, I would probably guess, yeah, I think God probably created other intelligent beings elsewhere. Not as confident of that as unintelligent life, but I would guess maybe he would. And so that would probably be my bet if I had to make a bet on this.
I'm kind of curious as to how he knows that God, because he said two things, I feel, in this, not that he necessarily adheres to one of them, but like he said, on the one hand, God could have set up the universe to where it produces life in certain situations. But now he's also saying, well, God could have created life on those particular worlds where life is possible. I'm wondering, I don't know if maybe he's like playing around with words, or if he's just not being as nuanced as he should be like here, but it just kind of seems like there's two different ideas that have been going on.
I actually looked more at this in a historical sense, because what Jimmy is saying here 400 years ago would have gotten him killed, literally, by his church, because in 1600, a little guy known as Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake in Rome, and among the heresies that he was supposed to have announced was the infinity of the universe and its inhabitants. Giordano Bruno was a believer in aliens as intelligent beings elsewhere in the universe, and we actually in the 1930s, we actually rediscovered in the Vatican archives basically the trial transcripts of his interrogations with the Inquisition back then. And apparently the Inquisitors, the thing that was their biggest bugaboo was Bruno's talk about aliens out there. And this apparently was one of the major reasons he was condemned and burned at the stake. So Jimmy being totally open and saying, yeah, there's very plausibly aliens out there, or even probably aliens, intelligent aliens out there, that would have been a capital offense in 1600, because that literally did happen. And there was many other religious proclamations of a similar sort of thing. The idea of there being other worlds with humans, or with intelligent creatures out there like us, any other sort of thing with the image of God, as they would say, the Imago Dei, that was considered heresy and punishable by death. I know, though, what Jimmy would say in response to that. He would point to another Christian philosopher, Nicholas of Cusa, about a century or so before Bruno, who also speculated about this sort of thing. But when I went back to Nicholas's writings in context, basically all he says is, God can do whatever he wants, so it's possible because, well, God does whatever he wants. But also just leaves it as just mere speculation, but also saying that, hey, we are actually at the top of the created order below the angels, and that's what we should actually expect. So what Jimmy says now would have been very much in contradiction to the faith a few centuries earlier.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how shit can change like that. Like go from such a radical response to like now it's, they're not just killing him.
Yeah.
All right, let's see where we got a couple minutes left on this clip, and this is only
All
clip
right.
number 2, by the way.
Of 12.
Yeah.
Are aliens coming here? Well, here we have a technological challenge because all of the transportation systems that humans have come up with are light speed limited. Having said that, we do have faster than light travel is not in principle forbidden by the laws of physics. You often hear that it is, but that's not accurate. What is forbidden by the laws of physics is using.
Oh, Aaron, you just totally got dunked on by Jimmy Cowboy Akin.
Superluminal cowboys.
Conventional propulsion to get up to the speed of light. Because for objects with mass, in order to get close to the speed of light, you have to progressively use more and more energy. And in order to reach the speed of light, you have to use infinite energy with a massive object. But actually, and you can check, for example, some videos by the German physicist Sabine Hassenfelder, among others, there are to talk about, well, actually, while we can't reach the speed of light, that doesn't mean we can't exceed it. And there have been proposals like the Alcubierre warp drive, which don't involve local motion that's faster than the speed of light. Instead, what the Alcubierre drive does is it stretches space before, in front of, and behind the ship, so that the ship ends up not in its own little warp bubble. It's not moving at all, but that warp bubble can move faster than the speed of light because space is not bound. The expansion of space is not bound by the speed of light. In fact, the universe itself is expanded faster than the speed of light. So if we could figure out how to build an Alcubierre drive, it would work in principle to get elsewhere. So I don't consider it impossible. In fact, even without faster than light travel, you could colonize a galaxy in 1 million years using slower than light self-replicating probes. And so even without faster than light being possible, I don't think it's impossible that aliens could find us and come here. The question is, have they? And here I'm open, but I'm not convinced. I've studied a lot of UFO reports.
Okay, so
That's a lot to chew on right
warp
there.
bubbles. All right. So what he is referring to is actually really interesting physics work starting in the mid 1990s. So this comes from the work of a Mexican physicist, Miguel Alcubierre, and he basically took the equations of general relativity from Einstein and basically said, hey, I'm going to create a geometry that has this really weird thing that it basically stretches the space behind this bubble, scrunches it in front, and allows this bubble to move along through space at a rate greater than the speed of light because it's actually squishing the space in front of it, stretching it behind it. And it was published in a reputable journal for special or general relativity. It's had a lot of additional research since then. It's been an active area of research. Even this year, there have been new publications related to this. And boy, oh boy, when I first discovered this idea back in the 90s, when I think I was still in middle school, I was like, holy cow, this is why I want to go into physics, so that way I can build this warp drive and finally, gallivant around the galaxy. Now, a few things have happened in my knowledge of this sort of thing beyond what Jimmy's mentioned here, because I didn't watch just a few YouTube videos about it. I looked into the research on it, and there's a few notable problems. And first off, as I mentioned before, if you can build anything that can travel faster than the speed of light, you've built a time machine. And then you get all of the problems that time travel paradoxes will come along there. If you can build the USS Enterprise go faster than light, you can then basically come back to your destination point earlier than you started, kill your grandfather before he gives birth to anyone, and make yourself not exist, and all the paradoxes that go with that there. And there is a significant issue with the way Alcubierre did his work in the first place. Normally what you do in general relativity is you got two sides of the equation for general relativity. One side is the distribution of mass and energy, and the other side is the geometry of space-time that conforms to that. Usually what you'll do is say, here is my distribution of matter energy. What does space-time look like over here? What Alcubierre did is take the geometry and then worked it backwards to get what's the mass distribution. And the reason that is problematic is that the mass distribution that might pop out may not be physically possible. And in particular, it seems that if you want to have a warp drive go faster than the speed of light, you need negative mass. What does that mean? All right. Everything you know has mass. Here's a bunch of paper clips or paper holders. It has positive mass, and if I want to accelerate it, I have to apply a force to make it actually speed up. If this thing had negative mass, negative inertial mass, if I pushed it to your left, my left, your right, if I push it this direction, the direction it accelerates is the opposite. I push it to the right, it speeds up to the left. The fuck? That should make you already say, that doesn't make sense. Or conversely, it's going to have a negative gravitational force on it. So if I take this and let it go, it's falling down. If it was negative mass and had negative gravitational mass, it would start falling up. Now, first off, we've never seen anything like that. And more importantly, if you actually had something like this, you could build perpetual motion machines. You could actually take a negative mass and positive mass, and the way that they would be effectively chasing after each other, you would be able to get infinite amounts of energy. So with negative mass, you get time travel, you get infinite energy, you get backwards motion when you press forward. Basically, everything goes screwy, which is just one of several reasons why everyone's like, there's no fucking negative mass in the universe. This makes no sense. It's the sort of thing that basically says this is non-physical, and so you're never going to actually build it. Right. You throw on top of all sorts of other issues that a warp drive would have, that it builds up a gigantic shockwave up the front, and so when you finally actually turn the thing off, it basically shoots a gigantic wall of radiation at whatever comes there. Navigation becomes impossible. The energy mass requirements are huge. Originally, when Alcubierre first did his calculation, the amount of negative mass that was needed was much more than all the mass energy of the entire observable universe. People have found ways to bring that estimate down a lot, but still, it's like, oh yeah, we need like a Jupiter of negative mass, something we've never even seen, let alone planet size. Things, of that absurd sort of amount. People pointing out that actually it can't even cross the light barrier. There's other research that's pointed that out. The best we can maybe do with a warp drive is maybe there is some way of making it consistent with subluminal velocity, so basically sublight speed motion. Maybe that's possible. I was reading a paper a couple weeks ago saying that, hey, we can actually consistently build one of these things without this exotic kind of mass, but it had two features that's worth noting. One, it doesn't go faster than the speed of light, so no Star Trek, and two, it can only go at constant speed, so it can't speed you up. So basically, what does it actually do to a ship? Zilch and nada. That's the current research of what we can do right now, and it's basically impossible to do the superluminal version. So that is why there is a lot of interesting theoretical work happening with these ideas, but no one really is pushing the idea that this is our way to travel the galaxy in a matter of years instead of millennia.
Right.
So, yeah, like I say, you want to watch more than just a few YouTube videos to know about the plausibility of these technologies.
Well, so the first thing that kind of struck me as off, and this is from a very I have a little bit of a physics background. Like, I skirted past physics 3 type stuff. And the one thing that really kind of got me was this whole idea that you can not attain light, like the speed of light, right? Like, you can't get to the speed of light, but you can exceed it. Like, I don't know, that whole concept right there. Like, if you're not into like the physics or even general relativity or whatever goes into this, if you're not minded in that kind of way, I feel like the whole idea that you can't get to the speed of light, but you can exceed it, am I wrong in thinking that that is a bit screwy? Like, I feel like that should be a red flag.
The way he's describing it seems even more counterintuitive than it needs to be. Because in the warp drive that he's describing here, basically you can actually have your ship in its own local bubble, its own local patch of space-time, have zero velocity, but then the bubble itself can go any possible speed. So that's how you would apparently then go faster than the speed of light, even though locally your little patch of space-time isn't actually zipping by you at absurd speeds. That's actually the ultimate genius of the math behind the original proposal that Alcubierre came up with. And I have to say, absolute props for, doing that. I'm pretty sure I would not have the mathematical chops to have done that. It's just that with more and more research, it just shows there's no possible way to get around the impossible matter it needs to get it to work.
Yeah. And I know that another, or at least something that's mentioned in a lot of like science fiction movies, for the lack of better reference, is, like wormholes, like, on the spot, creating a wormhole that basically bridges to 2 points in space and allows instantaneous travel. I'm kind of curious, in your own opinion, like, how is that maybe a better solution than this warp drive that Jimmy's talking about, or is it just a different solution? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, in some ways, it's very similar in that it's still basically messing with general relativity, the fabric of space and time, and allowing, this like instantaneous travel between points or near instantaneous travel between points. And also, you could turn it into a time machine. You can mess with it in that sort of way. But also, if you want to keep the wormhole open for a ship to travel through, you need the exact same sort of negative mass, this exotic matter, to keep it open. Because literally, even a photon of light trying to travel through would actually collapse it and wouldn't be able to succeed in getting across. Among other issues that this would have. There have been all sorts of fascinating ways to try to like build time machines or instantaneous travel things with the physics. There's one crazy one I remember as well. It's called the Tipler cylinder. It was a solution that was created by Frank Tipler, another physicist down at Tulane University. And basically, if you have an extremely huge, massive cylinder spinning around at close to the speed of light, that it will wrap space-time around in such a way that you can actually enter in one end of the loop and then pop out the other. But when I say it's a very long cylinder, I mean, in the math, it is easiest to work with one that's infinitely long, but I think you could get away with one as big as a galaxy, spinning at almost the speed of light, which is another way of saying we ain't building that.
All right. We've got about a little less than a minute left, about 40 seconds. So let's see what they got.
Yeah.
And some of them are harder to explain than others. Most of them are naturally explainable. Some of them are harder to explain than others. But I have yet to find a case that convinces me that they're here. What I find interesting is that our own Defense Department has been chronicling encounters with objects that we do not know how to explain. Now, they could be some kind of hyper advanced technology that we're working on, but the left hand is not telling the right hand what it's doing, or it could be hyper advanced technology from one of our competitor nation states, although I frankly don't think Russia and China are as advanced as that. So there are things that we don't know how to explain. I am not convinced that they're alien, but I'm open to the possibility that they're alien. So I guess that's a general sketch of where I am on all this.
So that's it for this clip. What do you think? Do you think that the Pentagon like files that got declassified and all that, do you think that that's like alien stuff, or do you think it's unknown, or do you think that it's like some kind of like, I guess, competitor nation as Jimmy was describing it?
Yeah, well, let's just go with what the conclusion of the person who headed up the task force for looking at all this, the former head of Arrow, who was basically supposed to like have all access to all the classified information to go through, get everything, and figure out as much as possible what are all these UFOs, or they changed the name to UAPs, for unidentified aerial phenomena. And at the time of his conclusion, time of his retirement, his conclusion was, it ain't aliens. There's no secret government program that is causing this or anything else. It's almost all certainly a whole bunch of little things. And some of it is also the fact that they started putting better radars in the various aircraft out there, and people started to see things they hadn't seen before and going, well, what the heck is that? And, sometimes that thing, what they were actually seeing turned out to be a spy balloon, but because people were chasing these things around thinking that they were alien spacecraft, or, basically thinking they're doing UFO hunting, weren't actually realizing, actually, that's a weather balloon, and it might be from an adverse nation trying to surveil us, which actually was the case. That whole Chinese spy balloon from last year, one of the other things that was a little bit less announced is like, oh yeah, we've actually been detecting these things for years, but not realizing what the hell they are. So unfortunately, a lot of that time and energy going into, we got to find the alien spacecraft, or we got to figure out what's at Roswell or things like that, things that our congressmen, our senators were funding, basically distracted us from actual things that we need to check. And we're not talking about high technology. We're talking about weather balloons with a like a transmitter. That's what some of this stuff is. Now, other things are not that. Some of it are Mylar balloons. A fair number of UFOs apparently are that. And so, like, researching what these things are is worthwhile because, hey, if there's a bunch of balloons flying around there that are hazardous to aircraft, we should know about that for the safety of the pilots and the passengers if they're on conventional aircraft. We don't need to have a bunch of F-16s go down because somebody had a birthday party. That's what we need to be avoiding. I agree totally. And some of the things that also are allegedly impossible to be done by modern tech. I very strongly recommend people look at the work of not Jim West, I'm forgetting his Mick West. He's done probably more than anyone else looking at some of the videos that first came out like in the late 2010s, which were alleged alien craft of some sort because of their strange motions, and basically able to go through and say this is mostly an artifact from the rotation of the infrared camera, or if you actually do the geometry, this thing that is called go fast isn't actually going super fast. It's just an issue of parallax by having a jet flying over probably a balloon at 500 miles per hour, where the balloon itself is blown in the wind at 40 miles per hour, and it just looks fast because of that parallax effect. Pretty much this seems to just be what happens over and over and over again. Hey, you can't explain this. Somebody explains it. Oh, you can't explain this other thing. Well, now we explain that. This has actually been going on with UFO claims for 50 plus years. You go back to the 60s and they say, hey, this thing is impossible to explain. There's no way some skeptic can explain it. A few years later, they figure out what it actually is. Oh, there's no way you can explain this thing in the 70s. Oh, we explained that. Oh, you can't explain this thing we just saw in the 90s. Oh, we eventually explained it. And then the UFO people don't talk about it and they just hop on to the next thing. And the fact that this has been going on for decades should make us stop and say, you know what? Maybe it's not aliens.
I mean, just maybe. I don't know. You need to leave yourself open to the grays, the lizards. What else? Like there's like 5 different races.
The skinwalkers in Utah. Unfortunately, a fair bit of the government money that went into searching for aliens was also searching for interdimensional beings running around a ranch in Utah called Skinwalker Ranch. And they were also claiming to see things like werewolves and werebeavers and other sorts of strange things like that. And no, I'm not making this sort of stuff up. This is actually the documented sort of stuff that they've been looking for, and even have a TV show on History Channel right now claiming all sorts of paranormal activity that government money went towards researching.
Werebeaver just sounds like a bad porn. I'm just saying.
When you say it's a bad porn, the thing is, it actually exists. It almost certainly exists. Rule 34 for the win or the loss.
or the loss. I mean, I'm sure there's Werebeavers 5, Where's the Wood, exists out there somewhere.
I'm not going to kink shame, but I wouldn't get into that.
No. Are you sure?
You better beaver it. I don't know. I'm bad on puns right now. Okay.
I do want to highlight this thing real quick. Sonic Shroom, we've got another super chat we'll handle at the end, but Sonic Shroom says, I think that the US Army are trying to make their enemies think that they have alien technology. And I just will say that if you've ever seen any army technology, you would know they're not trying to bullshit anybody about future tech. Anything that you see in the movies is movie magic. Okay. So I can tell you that if you're thinking future tech, no, you need to be thinking like 1965 Atari kind of shit. I'm just saying that's probably where your mind needs to be at.
Yeah. To be fair though, there is some truth that basically in like the 20th century during the Cold War, aliens was kind of a good cover up for some of the actual tech. So like a good number of UFO reports can be attributed to the U-2 spy plane, and the U.S. government was basically like, I guess it could be aliens. I mean, it's like allowing that possibility to exist as a way of covering the fact that, yeah, this is really our spy plane and it's flying over the Soviet Union or Cuba or wherever else it needs to gather intelligence for whatever needs to be done next.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's probably been used as like a cover up kind of thing a good bit, but
Yeah. But
just
it's also worth noting
try-
that it's also worth noting every sort of like technology that the U.S. government has is made by companies, and if those companies could make a shitload of money with that alien tech, we would have it.
Yeah, I definitely agree about that. All right, so this next video clip is concerning like this idea that the entire universe is made just for us.
Mhm.
And Jimmy's kind of already addressed this sort of idea, but we've got a very specific question from like an actual caller.
So if the Bible is true and Jesus is sent down for us, God made, hypothetically, God made all of humanity just for this purpose. Is the size of the universe a bit of an overkill for that?
So could you restate what you're understanding the reason that God made man for?
I mean, I guess it would be to worship God, but I guess I'm saying if we're put on this earth just for this purpose and the earth is put in this universe just for that purpose, why so much?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is counterintuitive that God would make a universe that's this big. I mean, the part of it we can see is 93 billion light years across. And that's just the part we can see. We have evidence that it's like, because of its flatness, we have evidence that it's probably, at least, the part we can't see, is at least like 250 times bigger at a minimum. And it may be even bigger than that. So it does seem counterintuitive to me to say that out of all that enormous vast space with stars and planets and galaxies, that we would be the only thing here. It does seem like overkill. Now, to be fair to a person who would say he does think we're truly alone, God does other surprising things on a theistic view. God becoming man, that's kind of surprising. Quantum physics, that's kind of surprising. So much of space being empty, that's kind of surprising. And so God does, on a theistic view, do surprising things. And it's
So wait a second. God has fine-tuned the universe for life, but has chosen to only put life on one small tiny speck, like in the vastness of the universe. Like, oh, God is fucking wiry. Like that seems ad hoc to me. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, it's really just shows like the ultimate weakness of theism as a hypothesis, because as he says here, well, God will do mysterious stuff, and it's basically a way of saying whatever happens, or whatever could happen, God could do that. It could be that case. And if it's anything is possible for God, any state of affairs is consistent with theism, then it's a useless hypothesis. It's if anything can be driven to become consistent with that, it reminds me of like, the worst forms of Freudian psychology. No matter what you tell your psychologist, it's because you want to have sex with your mother. And there's just one way or another, we're going to twist it to get always that, no, you fundamentally are a motherfucker. And, and you just have this unfalsifiable sort of hypothesis, and anything you say or do, we will find some way of twisting it to that end. That is ultimately what's happening with theism here. Jimmy even says it's counterintuitive that we'd be alone in the universe, but it's also consistent with theism because sometimes God does weird shit. It literally shows that anything is possible or consistent with theism, which is just a way of saying the hypothesis predicts nothing. If it's consistent with anything, it predicts nothing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I feel like a lot of the things that he's laid out here suggest that there's no predictive capability. So yeah.
And I'm going to also note that in many ways, while quantum mechanics has mind-blowing implications, in some ways, it's kind of the expected fallout from atomic theory, which is an idea that goes all the way back to the pre-Socratics. So it can't be that counterintuitive if it existed in some form millennia before quantum mechanics developed. And also, a lot of quantum mechanics is basically what you get from simple wave mechanics. You just say, hey, these are the effects when you have waves interacting, and this is how quantum mechanics pops out of that. So when you see it in that sort of way, you actually see that it is less mysterious at its foundation. It's just its implications are just so mind-boggling, and that you see particles penetrating barriers that you can't possibly walk through, or weird things like that. So at the very least, quantum mechanics is weird, but it is not as mysterious and weird as, say, guy walking on water and then dying and then rising back from the dead after a few days and then somehow flying up into heaven to go, where up? What is up? That's a different problem, isn't it?
Yep. You ready to continue?
Let's go.
It's thus not impossible for a monotheistic view to suppose that God created this enormous vast space in order to enable just the human race to exist. So I want to be fair to the position that position, but it does strike me as counterintuitive. Unfortunately, so do a lot of other things that happen to turn out to be true.
Well, hey, would it be fair if I add just one more question? And I'm okay hopping on to just let y'all discuss this.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said something.
Carry on.
So if we were to assume there is alien life, would Jesus' forgiveness cover aliens?
Okay, I actually did. No, sure, happy to handle it. I actually did an episode of Mysterious World on this. It's episode 55, so you can go to mysterious.fm/55 to hear the whole episode about the religious implications of aliens. But in principle, what we can say with confidence is that if aliens are in need of redemption, which they might not be, they might be unfallen, like the Venusians in C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy. They were a race that didn't fall.
Let's pause there.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So first consideration is aliens don't need salvation because they never fell. And he gives an idea of this from a novel series from C.S. Lewis. Okay, if aliens, or at least if there are some aliens that are not fallen, that they just always stayed in perfect grace, they never had the fall like Adam and Eve did, then how come we got the short end of the stick? Apparently, God is capable of creating worlds that never fall, and somehow like free will and high-mindedness and all those, great virtues can exist without the fall, and yet we suckers, we're trapped on the world that is fallen, that needs this extra salvation. How come we couldn't have been like that? Because apparently God can create worlds that maintain all of these great soul-making qualities that theists want to tout to explain the problem of evil and that. We're stuck with all these problems, but the aliens don't need them at all. It clearly shows that God could have done things differently, but for us, still said, nah, fuck you. That's a problem that just is not well confronted when you throw out this hypothesis, not realizing it undermines the entire idea that somehow the fall is necessary, or that our fallen nature is somehow necessary based on free will or anything like that. Because clearly, if aliens have free will and they're not fallen, we could have free will and not be fallen. Therefore, the free will defense for evil in the universe just makes zero sense.
Yeah, I think that's another good contradiction. When you compare the different explanations for different theological things, and I think that if you were to take aliens into account with Genesis, I would think that you would include just intelligent life. At that point, you'd have to reinterpret what was put down and not have it be so specific to humanity, but more to intelligent life. And therefore Adam and Eve fucked up, and that's going to affect somebody in the Andromeda galaxy or Alpha Centauri or some kind of shit like that, which makes it even more ridiculous in my opinion. But the fact that somebody could eat a fruit salad here on this planet and it apparently fucks over other intelligent life on other planets, I mean, I feel like at that point it really highlights the ad hoc nature of these arguments.
Oh yeah. All right, I think this next part, just let it play to the end.
Okay.
If they are in need of redemption, then Christ's death on the cross would be sufficient to cover them, because Christ is God, and therefore his death is of infinite value, and something of infinite value will cover an infinite number of sins. And so if they are in need of redemption, Christ's death on the cross here on earth would be sufficient to cover them. The question would then be, is it God's will to apply what Christ did on the cross here to them? Or would he prefer to redeem them in some other way, such as perhaps by having Christ incarnate on their planet to give them a visible demonstration of God's love for them, the same way Christ gave us a visible demonstration of his love for us?
Yeah, totally get it. All right, well, thank you so much for taking my call.
So the memes, everybody take note. Jimmy just affirmed the memes out there of alien Jesus on the cross dying for the sins of the alien brothers. Alien, not Aryan. Sorry.
Yeah. There might be, well, unfortunately, there's also the Aryan Jesus, but that's another topic, unfortunately. But yeah, actually, in fact, because of the way Jimmy described things here, he's actually taking contradictory views about something that is actually an active debate in theology right now. There is a group of theologians that apply their thinking to aliens, and it's known as astrotheology. And one of these questions is, hey, did Jesus have to only come into the material world once and die, and that is good enough for the entire universe, and so there's only one incarnation and one resurrection? Or does Jesus need to basically go quantum leap and hop from civilization to civilization across the universe and incarnate, get killed, and resurrected over and over and over again across potentially billions and billions of civilizations over billions and billions of years as new civilizations come and go throughout the entire universe? So basically, is there one Jesus or are there billions of Jesuses? And this is an active level of debate that theologians are not settled on in the least. And in fact, Jimmy seems to be taking both positions at once. The redemption, that Jesus' sacrifice was redeeming for the whole universe, but also God might want Jesus to go and do more redemptions anyways. So he's trying to have his cake and eat it too, and basically say it's both. Jesus' sacrifice is sufficient, but he's going to do more of it anyways. So now he's just, I guess, vainly getting himself killed by alien Pontius Pilate. And of course, the form of death will probably be different in all sorts of worlds. So for example, here on Earth, he takes human form, and so he gets nailed up to a cross and that sort of shape there. If he goes to the world of the slug people, then he gets salted for your sins, and that's how he is killed. It's going to be different for every kind of intelligent species out there. Yes. And this is an active sort of debate. And honestly, when I mentioned before that Bruno was killed for believing in the multiplicity of worlds, apparently from what we've seen from like earlier theologians, both Catholic and Protestant before 1600, they basically balked at the idea of there being other inhabited worlds because that would imply more than one Jesus. And that just seemed unacceptable. This is even a problem all the way going back to St. Augustine. When he was arguing about, are there people on the other side of the earth, the antipodes, they were called, literally on the other poles, and do they actually, well, there's also the idea that if they're over there, then they're upside down, and that's weird, but Augustine's argument is basically like, hey, if they're over there, there's no way they could be related to Adam, and so they can't have redemption because there's no way the descendants of Adam could have gotten across there. It was impossible to make that trip, and based on the geography beliefs at that time, his beliefs were at least consistent with that. Of course, lo and behold, we discover people on another continent in the Western Hemisphere, and then there's an argument, are these actually fully human? Are they actually descendants of Adam? Eventually, we figure out, okay, yeah, they're humans. And now imagine what that problem will be like for folks from Alpha Centauri or from the Andromeda Galaxy, where they're clearly not human descendants. We're going to have another theological nightmare explaining that. But main thing is this. There are contradictory issues with both ideas. If Jesus only comes here to Earth and dies for the sake of the whole universe, isn't that a little bit unfair to the rest of the universe that we get this special redemptive quality, but the rest of the universe doesn't get to? At most, they're going to hear about it from us. And by the way, if our mission is to tell the whole universe, we have automatically failed because it is physically impossible. That speed of light limit issue, suppose we develop a rocket that goes 99% the speed of light. There's already regions of the universe that we can never reach even with that rocket because the universe is accelerating away from us at faster than the speed of light. And that's assuming we have that technology to send things out. If we send out radio waves, they attenuate with distance. So we can't even shout at people and be heard on the other side of the galaxy, let alone the rest of the universe. Our job as missionaries to the rest of the cosmos is physically impossible. So if that's what we're expected to be doing to spread the good word, we failed by design. You got problems like that. Now, conversely, if Jesus has to go and get himself killed over and over and over and over again, it sure makes it look like Jesus' sacrifice isn't sufficient if he has to keep repeating it. How can you say that Jesus has conquered death if he has to get, killed every other Sunday on another planet?
What I'm taking away from this is I could wear like a gold encrusted salt shaker, and that could be a sign of Christ.
He was salted for your sins. Or as the slug people would say.
I mean, I totally agree with you that it seems counterintuitive that, Christ's sacrifice here is sufficient, but yet he would need to be killed on a different planet in a different way.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. Like, it seems like, oh, it's sufficient for your brand of life, but it's obviously not sufficient for this other brand of life. We got to make them suffer in a different way.
Yep. And the idea, if it was only going to happen once and far away, you can imagine the reverse. If Jesus, if the idea of God becoming incarnate as Jesus and coming to the world was this wonderful and brilliant and great thing, but it didn't happen here on Earth, it happened in the Andromeda Galaxy, it seems like that great, wonderful thing is being taken away from us, and only other people get, that wonderful gift. And it seems inherently unfair. So it makes sense that, okay, then Jesus needs to be hopping around the galaxy and doing, like I say, he needs to become Scott Bakula and quantum leap into body after body and getting himself killed until he has redeemed every civilization ever. But then, it makes Jesus never conquer death because he has to keep dying. And that's directly in contradiction to what it says in Hebrews, that Jesus basically died and entered the celestial temple for his blood sacrifice only once. Like, very clearly, it's a one-time thing. So, there's a reason theologians haven't resolved this problem yet, because it's almost like the religion that is based on only imagined a flat world with a dome and the stars are just places that angels hang around in, and that doesn't actually have the universe that we now know, and everything trying to be shoehorned in looks like a whole bunch of special pleading, and from time to time just putting your fingers in your ears going la 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 and hope the problem goes away. A lot of that really seems to be the problem of taking this ancient barely past the Iron Age theology and forcing it into the 21st century.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, the cosmology bit of it, because this is starting to sound a lot like, at least analogous to geocentrism. Because, like, with geocentrism, you have to make a lot of special rules for like the movements of the planets and everything like that. Like, you got to have like I believe it's retrograde or whatever. Like, you get to be able to explain how the planets move, with the Earth being at the center, you have to make up all of these special things, special rules that seem to contradict like a reasonable way to interpret things. And I kind of feel like this is venturing into kind of that area. Not exactly, like, it's not exactly analogous, I guess, because no analogies are perfect, but I feel like once you get to the point where you're like, well, yeah, there would have been a Jesus on another planet and everything, like, and then having to explain all of this shit that we've been talking about this entire time for this segment, it just seems like it just gets to the point where it's really tedious, really overloaded with explanations that it makes it a much worse hypothesis.
Exactly. It's religion. Theism is very much a collection of wheels within wheels, epicycles on epicycles, to try to make it work.
Yes, epicycles. Sorry, epicycles is what I was thinking of, not retrograde. Retrograde is the crystal shit.
Oh, no. Retrograde is actually the effect they're trying to explain with the epicycles. By having cycles on cycles, it can explain why occasionally the planets appear to move backwards in the sky. Okay.
All right. Well, the next segment that I have is actually called just quality of evidence. It's a relatively short clip. But I guess Jimmy's going to talk about the quality of evidence and how it relates to the New Testament.
I have been reading a different book, Unidentified Flying Hyperobject, by the Catholic philosopher Dr. Jim Madden. And on page 7 of Unidentified Flying Hyperobject, Dr. Madden says the following. As someone trained in the philosophy of religion, I was struck in particular by the fact that the evidence for the reality of the UFO, whatever it is is at least as good as the evidence is supporting the founding miracles of the major religious traditions. Whenever you think about those particular claims, I don't believe that they completely lack evidential support, as in the traditional miracle claims have enough going for them evidentially that they cannot be ruled out. If that is the case, then it seems that we can't rule out the UFO either. And given the continued frequency and quality of UFO reports, there are very good grounds to rule them in. I know that the church does not obligate her members to believe in aliens, but I want to know if Catholics ought to believe in aliens, not because the church says so, but because of epistemic considerations. Jimmy, do you agree that the evidence for the UFO is at least as good as the evidence for the resurrection, as Dr. Madden says in Unidentified Flying Hyperobject? And if so, does that give Catholics, and non-Catholic Christians too for that matter, an epistemic obligation to believe in UFO phenomena as well? Thank you so much for taking my question.
Okay. So I would say that I would need to read his book to see what kind of argument he makes. And I haven't read his book. I would say that I could see how evidence for UFOs is of comparable epistemic quality to events reported of a foundational nature in some religions, like, for example, Zoroastrianism. Okay, there was probably a Zoroaster at some point, but we can't even figure out what century he lived in. So I think that the foundation of Zoroastrianism is pretty weak. And that would be consistent with evidence regarding UFOs also being pretty weak. I view the evidence for the resurrection as being pretty high. And so I would need to see what UFO cases he proposes for being that high. But I would say in general terms that Christians need to believe whatever the evidence supports. So I think the evidence supports the resurrection. Christians need to believe in that. And if there is comparable evidence for the existence of aliens piloting UFOs here to Earth, then I would say Christians need to believe in that, just like they need to believe anything that the evidence supports.
So the evidence for UFOs matches the evidence we have for Zoroaster, but obviously the New Testament is the shit.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. The evidence we have for Zoroaster is religious texts that are attributed to Zoroaster in sources centuries or perhaps even near a millennia after his possible time. And the only reason we even date the text to like the 1200s-ish is based on the language that's used in the Avestas, if I remember correctly. That's basically the evidence we have for Zoroaster. Like, religious writing preserved in much later copies, but seems old as shit, so it probably comes from a long time ago. So maybe that guy who said this stuff was this Zoroaster that's talked about, like, in the 7th or 6th centuries BC. Is that really the same comparable evidence of someone here and now? I can go talk to a person who says they saw a UFO. We're not talking about, like, centuries-long levels of transmission from anonymous people. We can say we have people right now I can talk to that say they've seen UFOs. I have talked to people who've said they have seen UFOs. There are people who say they have had contact with aliens that are alive now, and other people who we have recorded on tape and on video. Are we really saying those claims of the that sort of thing is equal to centuries of oral transmission in poetry that some other person says maybe was this person? That is equal? That should be telling us, wow, you must think the testimony of these eyewitnesses of these UFOs must be rock bottom quality if it's the same level as centuries of oral transmission about stuff that we date just because it look old. and of course, let's take this around as well. If this shows us how much Jimmy thinks of the quality of eyewitnesses of UFOs or claims of contact or claims of alien abductions, and he finds none of them convincing, shouldn't that say, hey, this other eyewitness testimony about this guy coming back from the dead should also be treated with rock bottom, low levels of confidence? Because here's what eyewitnesses we can actually go to and talk to say, and we don't believe them. And all we have are these documents written by anonymous people in another language that's gone through a complex editorial process and finalized in its form at least a century after the alleged time of the events that were supposed to take in place when it comes to Jesus. All right, I would say that line of transmission is not as good as, hey, I can go and talk to someone right now who has claimed to have seen a UFO. One of my brother's friends has, told me that he has seen a UFO. So I know a person, I can ring them up on the phone and chat with them. I can't do that with the Gospel of Mark author.
Yeah, it seems rather cherry picky, or maybe he just hasn't really told us like how the UFO firsthand evidence is worse than the New Testament evidence. But it seems to me like even the Zoroastrian stuff, I feel like what you have are just primarily firsthand eyewitness accounts of people saying that they saw shit. and then other people believed that they saw shit, and then that got transmitted and then eventually turned into some weird crazy shit. And that applies for every single one, like New Testament, Zoroastrianism, and UFOs. And Jimmy is just saying arbitrarily, well, I believe the New Testament shit better than I do, or more than I do the, UFO shit. And he doesn't actually lay out any kind of actual criteria as to why, because on the surface of it, like you were saying, it just seems like firsthand account, but he's not actually telling us why one's better than the other.
Yeah.
I mean,
and honestly, I think, he probably explains this in other videos, and I would have to go through his large library of videos that he has on YouTube to see how he would explain the evidence. But I would imagine that one of the major reasons that he doesn't find a lot of the UFO cases all that good is because when we actually can look at the direct evidence related to those stories, we can find holes in them, or we can see that the person has a lot of embellishments, or they they're basically high fantasy people, or things like that, things that would bring down their credibility. But the thing is, that's with people who we can actually go and interrogate and check, because it's modern times and we have that. We're now trying to say, well, what about these people from 2,000 years ago who we don't know who wrote these things, in what language, where, and how long after the events, and all the things that we could possibly check to see what else might have been going wrong. It's like, no, it's just that we have this black box that prevents us from checking those sorts of things. And because we can't actively say, well, here's why we can't trust this author of Matthew, because they keep embellishing shit. That's why we don't trust them. Jimmy would just say, well, we don't have that evidence for that, therefore we can actually trust them because they're not an embellisher. It's like, no, it's not that they're not an embellisher, it's that we don't have the ability to check that, or at least allegedly. On the other hand, Matthew's also the one with the freaking zombie apocalypse, so I would say, no, this is the person most likely to just make up shit because he thinks it sounds cool. And that's his evidence for God becoming incarnate and rising from the dead after several days, and only being seen by a handful of people before he flew back up into outer space to return to his home planet.
Yeah. But I feel like if you were to put the UFO evidence in the same, on the same level as the New Testament evidence, like you were basically pointing out there, I feel like if you were to actually equalize the evidence, you would find that they're exactly the same.
And honestly, strangely enough, the UFO evidence is better because we don't have that step of anonymity. I can go and listen to recordings of Betty Hill, one of the famous abductees from the 1960s. I can't say we have an actual recording on tape of the author of the Gospel of Mark. Instead, we got this anonymous book written, we don't even know how long after the actual events, in a different language, in a different place, by someone who we know nothing about, who clearly has at least an agenda. And throw all those unknowns and compare that unknown person who we can actually confirm what they say, when they said it, and all the details of their story that we can also go and verify with what we have now. That is so much better than what we can do with anonymous decades after the event sources, which also, from what we can tell, have a tendency to make things up and make literary stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And for those who are interested, the case of Barney and Betty Hill is probably one of the very famous and foundational abduction stories, and is really the fountainhead for where we get the idea of gray-headed, bulbous-headed aliens, that they basically brought that into the public consciousness.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning them once before.
Yeah. Just an interesting couple from not New Mexico, from New England. Also must have had some interesting trouble because their abduction case was in the 1960s, and they were an interracial couple. And I mean, in some ways, even in the U.S. now, being interracial couple is problematic. In the 60s, there are parts of the country that would nearly get you killed. So that makes them an interesting couple just on that front. And I would love to actually know more about their romance story. If I knew more about it, it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a wild ride as far as at that time and place.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we do have another clip, which I think that maybe this might be the last one that we can get to. We had 10 clips to get through, but we've only made it about half, and it's about 2 hours that we've been going live here. And
If you want us to go
wanna-
longer, you got to put in some nice big super chats. All right.
yeah, exactly. All right, so this section is aliens getting to meet Jesus, and a caller has a question about the aliens meeting Jesus.
So go ahead, Clark.
Guys, thanks for having me again. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, can hear you great.
Just want to say real quick, thanks for all that you do. I've learned a lot from both of you. And my question is, if humanity ever makes contact with other intelligent life on other planets, should we expect that, and you kind of touched on this with 2 callers ago, but should we expect to find that Christ has, revealed himself to them? And would he have had to have sacrificed himself again for them? It kind of seemed unfair to me if these were also creatures created in the image of God, but they didn't have that revelation that we've been granted here on earth. And so I just wanted to know your thoughts if it makes more sense that Christ is visiting all the other planets with intelligent life out there, or if we make contact with them and we find that there's no evidence that he's visited them, is that evidence that Christianity might not be true?
Before he answers this, I find it incredibly limiting that God can only create life in his image. Like if you're going to argue that your God is all powerful and he's unlimited and all this other stuff, it seems rather weird to be like, well, but he's limited to creating creatures in his own image or whatever.
Yeah. I will note that the more modern interpretation of the image of God, the Imago Dei, is not that we are the same shape as the divine body. I mean, most theologians now basically have God so abstracted that he's actually formless and bodiless. So instead, the idea is that to have the image of God is basically to have consciousness, to have a sense of morality, things like that. That sort of reasonability and intelligence rather than an actual physical form. That is honestly a renegotiation of what it says in Genesis, because the whole point is in that story is to explain why we look like the way we look. And that is supposed to be why we are special in that sort of way. But it's now been re-explained for other reasons. And yeah, it's basically a necessary thing to do that, because otherwise then you have the issue. It's like, wait, does that mean alien Jesus, of course, would only look human as well, and all the other aliens out there must also be humanoid? So it's just like Star Trek, where somehow, some way, all the intelligent species out there are just humans with pointy ears or other like facial features, but they're still all humans. That's obviously a limitation with the costume department rather than actual biology. I forget which ancient Greek philosopher basically said, if horses could build statues and they built statues of their gods would look like horses. So yeah, we would always have that sort of a problem, that if we really say that God has the human form because that's the most special, then it's just straight up human centrism. It's basically completely undoing the Copernican revolution. We're not the center of the universe, guys.
Okay, so I think that I'm very hesitant to tell God what he can and can't do. And so, in fact, I'm even a bit more hesitant to do that than Aquinas is. So I would say that it's quite possible that what I think I can say with good confidence is that if there is life, and that's an if there is life that has human level intelligence out there, then God will be known to them in some way. Either they'll deduce the existence of God, because it is possible to deduce the existence of God from the various arguments for God, like we talk about here on Capturing Christianity, or God may go beyond just what they could deduce for themselves and reveal himself. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody on their planet is going to be a believer in God, because even here on Earth, not everybody's a believer in God. Buddhists don't believe in God. Historically, most Buddhists were atheists, or at least agnostics. And so before the rise of the later forms of Buddhism, the original form of Buddhism was atheist agnostic. And so we have a bunch of people here on Earth who have mistaken ideas about God, but we also have people here on Earth who have correctly reasoned their way to God, or who have been in touch with God by revelation. And I would expect similar situations on other planets. Now, we might find exceptions. We might find a planet where everybody believes in God, or we might find a planet where nobody believes in God. But at least based on the one data point we have, which is the planet Earth, I would expect we'd see situations on other planets that are a lot like what we see here on Earth. And here on Earth, if we look at its history, people did not always know about Jesus. They didn't know about him for all the time before he incarnated. And the Jewish people had some hints that he was coming, but he didn't arrive until 3/2 BC. And so if we found an alien planet and there had not been a revelation of Christ or an incarnation of Christ there yet, I would say, well, it could be that God's not planning to do that here, that he plans to let the aliens know about him in some other way. Or it could be we just haven't got up to their equivalent of 3 or 2 BC and their incarnation hadn't happened yet. So I think there are lots of possibilities, and we have to wait and see if there are aliens when we meet them, what they do or don't know about God. But I don't think that tells us anything about whether Christianity is true or false. We have independent evidence for that.
I mean, can you imagine greeting an alien and you have some hick hillbilly come out there and be like, hey, y'all know about Jesus Christ? Have y'all had a Jesus Christ yet? What's your 3/2 BCE time frame here? Like, are y'all pre or post?
Yeah. And of course, if the aliens come down, they come in their flying saucer, they land in front of, the Capitol building in DC, they come down and you see they're Muslim. What's Jimmy going to say? Or they have a completely different sort of religion and they are also evangelical and they're also crusader-like a whole bunch about it. What if the aliens are less like Christians and they're more like the Covenant from the Halo series? They're aliens, they're powerful, they got guns, and they got a religious drive to wipe the universe clean of the scum that is us.
Honestly, I feel like that's a comparison of Christianity in the Middle Ages versus Christianity now.
Yeah. It's a little bit worrisome that it's also worth noting here that Jim is saying that, well, the aliens can deduce God or God can reveal himself and have some level of relation so that they'll know about him. But if we go by what's going here on Earth, God has done a pretty shit job at making himself known. So first off, there are lots of people that don't believe in any sort of God at all. They've actually, if anything, reasoned themselves out of religion rather than into it. And if we look at the pluralism of religions in the world, most people believe the other majority of people are wrong about fundamental foundational things. So how clear has God been about his existence and what he wants and what is the truth? If you go by how religion has developed, you would have to say pretty bad communication job. All right. You would think the master of truth would have better propaganda to get people in order, so actually everyone at least knows what they're supposed to be believing, rather than everyone being so divergent on what beliefs are. There's not even a majority belief in a particular version of God.
Yeah. I find the entire concept that they're supporting here to be quite ridiculous. Just in all aspects of it.
Yeah, and it's just the necessary sort of explaining away the problem, because it's like, yeah, here are all these now extra new possibilities that you never considered before or were never considered before, because when the ideas of the Christian religion first developed, the idea that there are even other planets or other places that need some sort of salvation or getting right with God just wasn't even epistemically possible. The very concept just wasn't even metaphysically available. The idea that beyond the atmosphere is other worlds that you could visit and might have creatures on them just wasn't even a possibility for early Christians, even though the idea of aliens exists at least back in the time of Epicurus, 3rd century BC. He's the earliest person that we have some documentation showing that he believed in the possibility of infinite worlds with life on them. We even see this showing up in 2nd century AD science fiction. The idea that you could travel to the moon and the other planets of the solar system, and there's life there, and there's other beings there, and there's other kingdoms there. But the Christians basically rejected all that and burned people at the stake who thought otherwise, like Bruno.
Of course, I wonder, by the 2nd century, were Christians still believing like in a physical layer of heaven, like in a firmament and all the different layers above that, or was that pretty much a 1st century and before kind of idea?
Well, I mean, you already, if you go into later medieval, early modern period literature, the idea of the layers of heaven still exists, though they get a bit harder to interpret. So, for example, you have layers of heaven in Dante's Divine Comedy. Everyone knows about the Infernal and the 9 levels of hell, but there's also levels of purgatory and there are levels of heaven. And 9 levels there, starting from like the moon, the various planets, the sun, the stars, and then beyond the stars themselves, the actual abode of God. And usually they're also depicted as having some sort of gate system that you have to get past for that. The ultimate destruction of that idea that there are these solid crystalline spheres surrounding the Earth was finally demolished in the 16th century by a comet being observed by not Johannes Kepler, but previous Tycho Brahe, a Danish astronomer, and basically was following this comet and making measurements of it to figure out how far away it was, and realized the path it was taking, it would be smashing through all of those different spheres. And that became like, the final disproof, or at least very convincing disproof to most people that that sort of layering just doesn't exist out there. But from what I understand, the ideas about the outer layers of the cosmos were already getting complex before then. I don't know enough of the details of when exactly they threw open the gates of the heavens and said, no, it's all travelable.
Okay. Interesting. We've got about 2 minutes left. You wanna power through this?
Power.
And what we would be learning about is not through alien contact, is not is Christianity true or false, but what has God done with this alien people so far?
Can you touch on real quick, kind of unrelated, but why did God choose a specific point in time to become incarnate?
Mhm.
Like, why not come multiple times throughout, to all peoples, all generations? Why just one time?
Yeah, well, what we can say.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna let Jimmy finish, but good fucking question. I have to say, like, that's a good, like, why this arbitrary point in time? Let's see what Jimmy has to say. Oh, well, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good question. The Almighty comes down and he's first seen in a fishing village. It seems a little parochial, all things considered.
Yeah.
Is that if we look at the revelation we have in Scripture, God likes to start small and go big. So it all starts with the chosen people, all starts with Abraham, and then it grows from there. And in the same way, he wanted to start with his son incarnating one time, and then having the Christian faith grow from there. And he wanted to include. I was just talking about this, I think yesterday on Catholic Answers Live, but he wanted to wait until there were a certain number of people in the world that he wanted to reach. He could have ended the world right after Adam. He could have had Jesus be born, and then a grand total of say 5 people get to go to heaven. But God wanted more than that. And so he allowed the human race to grow before he instituted the chosen people and before he sent his son. And he even put his chosen people at the crossroads of the old world. They're not way down in sub-Saharan Africa. They're not far east in Asia. They're not far west in Europe. And so they were right at the center. And what that allowed to happen when the Christian faith started was it easily spread in these different directions. And so I think that.
Yeah.
I mean, if Christianity is convincing and is the truth and everything, don't you think that regardless of where it pops up, it would be able to spread? Like what on an oblate spheroid that we live on, why is one particular part of it like more likely to allow it to spread than like another part of it? It's
also, I mean, he's going to try to say this is a great place to, so that way when it's in Rome, then it can use the Roman road system and communication systems and things like that. It's like, well, if the purpose is to spread and spread widely, then wouldn't it make more sense that Jesus actually came today so he can pop up and start a Twitter thread and start spreading the message that way to the entire planet all at once, rather than coming back in time and basically the only way the message can go around is on foot? And also he's saying well, this is the crossroads for the old world. So I guess, well, fuck you, Native Americans. Fuck you, Australians. You don't get to have this be easily accessible. The only way you're going to learn about Jesus is when the fucking colonizers come and kill almost all of you. It's a little bit weird. It's like, again, when Jimmy says, well, God likes to start small and then go big, it's like, that is you, of course, trying to explain why it is that way. Why is that actually the preferred way, rather than actually getting everyone on board at the same time if the whole message is supposed to reach the whole world? Being really difficult to getting around the whole world, taking centuries, or in some case more than 1,000 years to actually get to the other side of the world, is hyper inefficient, to put it mildly. And again, this is the Almighty. If he can do anything, why didn't he do the thing that actually makes sense if his purpose is to spread the message? And again, if we're saying, well, he needs to wait long enough so there's more people to save, and so it's going to be easier to communicate to those people, God coming now, or Jesus coming now, would make more sense than in BC times. Again, if God started a YouTube channel, he could be communicating with a whole lot more people much faster. If Jesus were doing TikTok dances, the message would have spread real fast.
Yeah. Also, another thing that I'm confused about is when he said that, like, well, God could have had Jesus born like immediately, but then only 5 people would get saved and go to heaven. I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because like if God had Jesus born immediately, and then everybody would be saved, like, from then on, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
the question is, who would fucking crucify Jesus at that point, right? Like, it would have to be like Adam, Eve, or one of his brothers and sisters. But I mean, it seems rather ridiculous to be like, oh, well, only 5 people would be saved. No, everybody's still getting saved here.
Yeah, and conversely, by allowing more people, are also more people who will not be saved and then get infinite punishment in hell. So because God wanted more people in heaven, he guarantees that some people will be tortured forever. That's the height of sadism. What we were saying before. How do we know God is actually the good guy here if this is the setup? By the way, I think your video is frozen, or at least it looks frozen for me.
Oh no, hold on. Yeah, apparently my...
Either that or you're an extremely good mime.
I am a very good mime at times. No, my camera's actually went out.
Overheating,
so I need no, my camera just needs to be restarted.
Okay.
1 second. I'm gonna let Jimmy talk. He's got
let
about
Jimmy
40
finish
seconds
this.
left.
All right.
That what we can say with confidence is God wanted to enable the salvation of a large number of people. And so he waited until the human race had grown to a sufficient size and had attained certain civilizational requirements like widespread peace, economic development, and road systems that would allow the faith of his son to spread easily compared to other places and times. And so I think that's why Christianity, or part of why Christianity happened where and when it did. And then God, because he's merciful and doesn't expect people to respond to things they don't know about, he'll show mercy to everyone who is innocently unaware of the fact that they should embrace the Christian faith. And that includes all the people before the time of Christ. So they'll all be taken care of and dealt with fairly and lovingly.
All right, Clark, really appreciate your call. Thanks for calling in.
All good.
And with that, Jimmy just basically proved why there should not be evangelicals. Because if people don't know about Jesus and they get saved, the worst possible thing you can do is tell them about this and then have the possibility they don't accept it and then not get saved. Apparently, the best way to keep people from going to hell is to not even let them know that hell exists. So, Jimmy, shut up. You're killing people in the worst way possible according to your own theology.
I just... this all just seems so ridiculous, because I feel like he didn't actually answer the dude's question. Like, why? I mean, I don't know. Maybe he did.
Well,
Like,
his
the
answer
question
was
is-
he wanted that Jesus needed to come at a time when there was widespread peace and road systems and things like that. And again, while there was the so-called Pax Romana, that basically was a peace from civil war, the Romans were still like going around and like warring the shit out of the place. That's one thing. 2, even you lived in Rome, it's not like the streets were just, wonderful places to go. You still had plenty of street violence. If you want to have Jesus come to a time when there is widespread ability to communicate, really good quality roads, and higher levels of peace, Jesus would be coming now, or in the most peaceful time now in all of human history. And our communication abilities is the greatest it's ever been in human history. From Jimmy's own logic, Jesus only should have come in this time, not 2,000 years ago. So again, his ad hoc reasoning here would contradict the plausibility of Jesus being a first century prophet, and instead you would expect him to be showing up now from his own reasoning.
Yeah, none of this really makes a lot of sense to me, personally. because it all just seems very ad hoc and confusing. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not smart enough to get it.
Well, like I say, it's ultimately a whole lot of ad hoc reasoning, and where a chain of logic can be provided, it's still a chain of logic with a whole lot of weak links, and it should not be convincing. And ultimately, why is it there? Why are these things being said? It's not to convince non-believers like us. It's to keep believers in the fold and make it look like it's plausibly respectable and intellectually feasible, even though it is a Herculean task to hold these chain links together.
All right. Well, I think that's going to be all that we can cover tonight. Aaron, I really appreciate you coming by and explaining a lot of this to us, especially me, because I'm pretty well versed in physics and all this other stuff, but you are obviously the expert in this particular field, so I do appreciate it. And I know that we have like 5 other clips to get through, and they're not too terribly long, but maybe we can get you back on here sometime in the next couple weeks to go over the rest of them.
Yeah, let's see what the demand is for it. So, audience, you're going to have to let us know if this was an interesting talk and you want to hear about the alien demons some more, about some other abduction cases. How does Jimmy try to understand the vision from Ezekiel? Is that aliens and UFOs or not? So that's some of the other possible clips that we could be exploring from this same chat from a couple weeks ago. So get in the comments, say what you want.
Yes, definitely. Let us know what you thought down below and in the comments or in the live chat right now, either one. All of that works. We do have a couple of super chats to get to. First is Vibes Girl 2003, who says, "Why are people a-holes to Jeebus mythicists? Love you." I don't know. I know that there's a lot of animosity towards the mythicist position. I'm not exactly sure why. I think that there's been a lot of, a lot of foundation that has been laid by previous not just apologists, but just previous people in general that have, sort of set the tone for the conversation. And it's really hard to get past that initial feeling that people have been set up with. I don't know. What are your thoughts there, Aaron?
So some of it is self-inflicted, because I would say most of the mythicists online basically push out the really crappy sort of stuff that Jesus is a carbon copy of Osiris, the Cursey Grave 12 crucified savior sort of stuff, the Acharya S sort of stuff, everything that basically it's a giant conspiracy sort of thing. And when anyone comes along and shows why a lot of that is just complete bunk, and the vitriol that gets responded out there, I think it creates an atmosphere that tarnishes the idea of treating the idea of Jesus mythicism seriously. So there is some level of self-infliction, because a lot of the shit out there is just crazy balls.
It definitely is. And then finally we got Sonic Shroom, who says, were Adam and Eve directed to breed before the fall?
Well, they were told to be fruitful and multiply, and that was before the whole apple thing. So the idea, what makes it sound like, is that before that, they were going to breed, and there would have been no issues having babies. But then after the whole apple incident, then pregnancy became painful for Eve. And that probably has the context idea that Eve would have known what pregnancy is like, and now how it's going to be changed into something painful and terrible. But of course, the Genesis story doesn't talk about 400 babies before Cain and Abel or anything like that. So details are lost. But if you do take the be fruitful and multiply command before the other commands, it would suggest the two of them were doing things.
Yeah. I definitely think so. I believe that there's actually a pretty good dark matter video animation that he did, where it's like, well, what if Adam and Eve didn't eat the apple, right?
Yeah.
Then the whole idea that they wouldn't have died, but they were still going forth and multiplying. And so basically nobody would die and they would just fuck each other senselessly. And the entire world would just be stacked full of people that just would never die. So it's like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like if you take these stories literally, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. All right, Aaron. Well, that's it for the super chats. I really appreciate you coming by. Everybody, I have updated the description so that it has a link to get Aaron's books, like all the books that are available on Amazon there. So you can go there, you can check out his books. If you are interested in any of the stuff that we talked about tonight, you can definitely pick up the Aliens and Religion book that I got right here. That should be in the list as well. So definitely check that out. And I guess we'll see you heathens next time, especially if y'all want to see more of this, because we would really love to talk more about aliens and demons and all that other kind of good stuff. So we'll see y'all later. Do you have any final thoughts there, Aaron?
This topic is fascinating because we're at this crossroads of the science we can show, the science we can speculate about, and the religious things we can speculate about, and the religious things we can study, because we can, actually see what happens when a supposedly technologically advanced civilization comes along, and what happens to the religious views of the less technologically advanced people. And it could be an interesting thought experiment about if aliens come and land, what's going to happen to world religion then? And that is one among many things that I explore in the book with Jonathan Pierce. So all the more reason to buy that book, have us on, and talk more about how wonderful and crazy these ideas can get.
Yes, I definitely would suggest that. Anyways, y'all have an awesome night. Don't forget to stand up, use your voice, and all that kind of good shit. Make sure you comment and everything like that down below. And I guess I will see you heathens later. Bye, everybody.